Harvard's lecture hall went silent when the janitor corrected the professor's equation, and the math worked. Laughter froze. Eyes widened. In one stroke of chalk, she shattered every lie they'd told about who belonged there. But before anyone could speak, campus security stormed in and arrested her for defacing property. The question is, why was truth the real crime? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning light spilled across Harvard Yard like liquid gold, catching the dust motes that floated through the air. Students hurried across the cobblestone paths, clutching coffee cups and laptops, their laughter echoing under the centuries-old arches. To them it was another ordinary Tuesday, a day of lectures, deadlines, and privilege. But for Amara Lewis, it was a battlefield dressed in marble and ivy. She walked the halls quietly, her navy janitor uniform crisp, her ID badge swinging from her chest. The name, Amara Lewis, was printed in black ink, small and unremarkable. Beneath it, a red sticker read, "Facilities Maintenance." She hated that sticker. It reduced her to a label that erased everything she had once been. In another life, she had been Dr. Amara Lewis, one of the youngest mathematics doctoral candidates at Georgia Tech before her funding mysteriously disappeared. In this one, she carried buckets and mops through Harvard's grand corridors, her mind still running equations faster than most computers could process. Her shift began before sunrise. Empty halls, empty rooms. That was when she could breathe. She liked cleaning the mathematics department most. Even the smell of chalk dust stirred something in her, something nostalgic, something that reminded her she still belonged to numbers. This morning she moved through room 204, a grand lecture hall, with dark wooden benches and a blackboard that stretched the length of the wall. She wiped the chalk stains off the desk, listening to the faint murmur of students gathering outside for Dr. Charles Whitmore's advanced theoretical mathematics class. Whitmore was the kind of man who carried arrogance like a tailored suit. His lectures weren't discussions, they were declarations. His students idolized him. The faculty feared him. He was known as Harvard's pure mathematician, the kind who dismissed modern thinkers as pretenders. When the students began filing in, Amara kept her head down, gathering her supplies. She wasn't supposed to be there once the lecture began, but as she reached for her bucket, a piece of chalk rolled from the table, clattering to her feet. She bent to pick it up, and froze. On the board, Whitmore had written a dense wall of equations, symbols sprawling across the black surface like ancient hieroglyphs. They were beautiful. He was trying to derive a pattern involving quantum field tensors and nonlinear symmetry groups. Amara's heart raced. The problem was centuries deep, stretching from Einstein to Gödel, and yet she could see something no one else seemed to. The symmetry was wrong. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the symbols. Every instinct told her to leave, to finish her cleaning, and walk away. But her mind refused. She whispered the numbers under her breath, rearranging them, visualizing shapes, folds, and dimensions that existed only in her head. "Excuse me, you missed a spot," someone muttered behind her. A few students laughed. She straightened slowly, keeping her composure. Whitmore had entered the room, watching her with thinly veiled irritation. He said dryly, "The custodial staff has very strict hours. You might want to finish before the real work begins." The class chuckled. Amara nodded silently, setting down the chalk. "Yes, sir," she said softly. Her voice carried no malice, only restraint. But then as she turned to leave, Whitmore added, "Unless of course you plan to solve it for us. That would be something." More laughter. The sound of privilege filled the hall. Amara paused, her back straightened slightly, her eyes scanning the equation again. Without replying, she stepped toward the blackboard, her fingers brushing the smooth chalk. The students quieted, curious now. Her movements were calm but deliberate, as though gravity itself had slowed to watch. "Miss, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Whitmore asked, amusement laced with disbelief. Amara didn't look at him. "Your symmetry group collapses under the second derivative," she said. "You're treating it as if it were invariant." The air stilled. The sentence was too precise, too technical to dismiss as luck. Whitmore frowned. "I beg your pardon?" she wrote swiftly, chalk tapping rhythmically against the board. Equations bloomed from her hand, lines and arcs of logic intertwining, forming a structure that even Whitmore hadn't dared to attempt in real time. Her handwriting was clean, confident. She crossed out his final line and replaced it with an entirely new expression, one that inverted the tensor's relationship with time symmetry. Whitmore stared. The students leaned forward, whispering to one another. Amara stepped back, her heart pounding. You assumed a closed system, she said quietly. But the field behaves asymmetrically when boundary variables decay. Whitmore blinked, trying to follow. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The math was solid, terrifyingly solid, yet it came from a janitor in uniform, holding a chalk stick like a sword. Who taught you that? He finally asked, half sneer, half disbelief. Amara's gaze met his. No one had to, she said. It's just math. The room erupted into murmurs. A few students began snapping photos with their phones. Others exchanged glances filled with awe or confusion. Whitmore's face flushed red. His pride pricked deeper than any insult. This is absurd, he barked. You think you can just walk into my lecture hall and challenge me? You're here to clean, not. But before he could finish, one of the students raised a trembling hand. Professor, she's right. If the boundary decays asymmetrically, your equation collapses. Whitmore turned sharply. Excuse me? She's right, another student said. The correction balances the tensor field. The laughter that had once filled the hall now dissolved into silence. Whitmore's hands shook as he examined the board. The logic was seamless, elegant, terrifying in its accuracy. Amara stepped back, uncertain of what she'd just unleashed. She didn't want glory or attention. She only wanted to prove, perhaps to herself, that the silence they forced upon her didn't mean she was invisible. Whitmore swallowed hard, then turned to her. What's your name? Amara Lewis. Lewis. He repeated it as if testing the sound. You have no business writing on this board. I wasn't trying to, she said. It was just wrong. The audacity in her simplicity infuriated him. You think you can correct a tenured Harvard professor? No, she replied softly. I think math corrects itself. The class fell dead silent. Even the hum of the overhead lights felt louder. Whitmore opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door creaked open. The dean of the department, Dr. Helena Strauss, entered. Drawn by the unusual commotion, her silver hair glimmered under the fluorescent lights, her sharp eyes scanning the tense scene before her. Professor Whitmore, she said coolly. What's going on here? Whitmore straightened. A misunderstanding, Dean Strauss. One of our custodians thought it would be amusing to write on the board. The dean's gaze drifted to the blackboard. She studied the dense web of symbols for a long, breathless moment. Her brow furrowed. She recognized enough of the mathematics to know it wasn't gibberish. Who wrote this? She asked. Whitmore hesitated. She did, he said finally, pointing to Amara. She's clearly overstepped. Dean Strauss turned to Amara. Is that true? Amara hesitated, unsure if honesty would save or destroy her. I didn't mean to overstep, she said. I just saw an inconsistency. Strauss's eyes sharpened. An inconsistency, she repeated. In Professor Whitmore's derivation. Yes, Amara said. The symmetry is unstable. The dean took a slow step forward, examining the board again. Her lips parted slightly, as realization dawned. This wasn't random scribbling. It was a legitimate correction, possibly even a groundbreaking one. She turned to Whitmore, her voice cool but firm. Professor, humor me, let her finish. The color drained from Whitmore's face. Excuse me? You heard me, the dean said, folding her arms. If she began something, let's see if she can finish it. Whitmore stammered. Dean Strauss, this is highly irregular. So is brilliance, she interrupted. The class stared, breathless. Whitmore's authority, the invisible wall between intellect and labor, had just been cracked in half. Amara stood frozen, the chalk still in her hand, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had asked her to finish something that mattered. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked at the board, at the problem that had haunted minds for decades, and then at the room full of faces that had never once looked at her as anything but a cleaner. And in that fragile, suspended moment, Harvard stood still. The professor's laughter fades when the dean steps closer to the board, eyes narrowing. Ms. Lewis, she says, her voice slicing through the silence. Finish what you started. The chalk still ghosted her fingertips that night. No matter how many times Amara washed her hands, the white dust lingered, like memory refusing to fade. She walked home under the dim glow of the street lamps, her mind still replaying the moment when the dean told her to finish what she started. It had felt surreal, like a door cracked open after years of pounding fists. But even as she replayed it, her chest tightened with dread. She knew how Harvard worked. A single misstep from someone like her could erase everything, even the chance to breathe freely for one brief afternoon. Her small apartment sat on the edge of Roxbury. Bare walls, one flickering bulb, and a second-hand couch that sagged in the middle. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. On the kitchen table, math papers lay scattered, edges curled from constant handling. Amid them sat a crayon drawing her son Malik's latest masterpiece, a stick figure woman holding a mop in one hand and a chalk stick in the other. Above her, in his crooked handwriting, he'd written, "My mom is the smartest person in the world." Amara smiled faintly, exhaustion settling in her bones. She lowered herself into the chair and picked up a notebook, pages filled with dense mathematical symbols. The equation from earlier haunted her mind. Its beauty, its symmetry, its power. For years she had buried her brilliance beneath anonymity, solving problems in the dark, sending her solutions to journals under fake initials. Not for fame, but for survival. A name like Amara Lewis came with too much weight for the world to treat kindly. She opened one of her old notebooks, flipping to a page dated 7 years ago. The paper bore the remnants of sleepless nights, spent balancing her dreams with rent bills. Malik had been 2 then, sleeping in a crib beside her as she wrote by candlelight. During a blackout, she remembered whispering to him, "One day, baby, numbers will feed us." But numbers alone couldn't protect her from the prejudice that shadowed her steps. It started long before Harvard, back in Atlanta, where she grew up in the crumbling towers of Lincoln Homes. Her mother, Dorothy Lewis, had scrubbed office floors by day and read Bible verses by night, her faith the only wealth she owned. Amara's childhood was marked by hand-me-down textbooks and the smell of bleach. Yet by age 12 she had already outpaced her teachers. At 15, she was solving graduate-level problems, mailing her work to professors she admired. Some replied politely, others not at all. One, from MIT, sent her a letter she never forgot. "Dear Miss Lewis, while your enthusiasm is admirable, these concepts may be above your level of understanding. Keep studying basic algebra, and perhaps one day you'll grasp the fundamentals. Dr. C. Whitmore." Yes, that same name. Even then, his words had seared into her. Not because of the dismissal itself, but because of what he assumed, that brilliance couldn't live in a black girl from a public housing project. When her SAT scores arrived, perfect in math, she thought the world would finally listen. But recommendation letters vanished. Scholarships ran out and interviews turned cold once her face appeared. "We're looking for a certain fit," one admission officer had said, eyes flicking toward her skin. So she did what she'd always done, adapted, survived. By 19, she enrolled in community college, tutoring engineering students who could barely follow her reasoning. A local professor, Dr. Avery Collins, recognized her talent and helped her apply to Georgia Tech. For a while it seemed the world had finally seen her. She thrived, submitting papers that bent the boundaries of nonlinear systems. Professors whispered about her potential. "She's the next Katherine Johnson." Once, then, in her final semester, everything collapsed. A grant she depended on suddenly vanished, after an anonymous complaint accused her of plagiarism. The review board never told her who filed it. The funding committee offered a thin smile and said, "You're still young, Miss Lewis. Maybe next year." She didn't fight it. Fighting required allies, and she had none. Within months she dropped out, took a cleaning job at a research lab, and tried to pretend she didn't hear the laughter when she emptied trash cans beside chalkboards full of her own theories. But genius never dies quietly. Even after Malik was born, she couldn't stop thinking about the unfinished work she'd started. The equation of dynamic symmetry, as she called it. Night after night, after Malik fell asleep, she wrote, her notebooks filled with symbols that made no sense to anyone else. Sometimes she mailed them to journals under initials like AL or ALW, careful never to reveal her full name. She even got a few responses, technical rejections, laced with admiration. One editor had written brilliant structure, but too unconventional to publish. Still, Amara kept going. It wasn't ambition that drove her, it was defiance. Every time she saw her reflection in a janitor's bucket, she reminded herself that a uniform couldn't erase intellect. "Mom," Malik's sleepy voice called from the bedroom. She turned. He stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "You're up late again," he murmured. "Couldn't sleep," she said, smiling faintly. "The numbers are talking tonight." He padded over and climbed into her lap, his small hands tracing the lines of her notes. Are they saying something good? They're saying. She hesitated, then whispered. They're saying not to give up.
Malik yawned. Then don't.
His words, simple and innocent, pierced her heart more deeply than any praise could. When he fell asleep again, she returned to the table. The city outside was quiet. A siren wailed distantly, echoing like a memory. She stared at the stack of old mail, rejection letters, unpaid bills, notes from journals. One envelope caught her eye. It bore the logo of a scientific publisher she hadn't heard from in years. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a glossy pamphlet advertising a new book, Mathematical Frontiers, the Breakthrough Theorem on Asymmetric Symmetry Fields. Her breath caught. She flipped to the author's name, Dr. Charles Whitmore. For a moment, her world tilted. The title of the first chapter hit her like a punch, revisiting the Lewis field hypothesis. Her name, her theory. She scanned the pages, heart pounding. Every line, every equation. It was hers. The proof, the structure, the language, down to the variable names. He had taken her unpublished paper, rewritten it, and presented it as his own. Her fingers trembled as she dropped the pamphlet onto the table. The room spun. The years of silence, the rejection letters, the humiliation. All of it suddenly made sense. He hadn't ignored her because she was wrong. He'd ignored her because she was right. Rage boiled under her skin, but beneath it was something heavier: betrayal. Not just by a man, but by a system that made theft invisible when the victim looked like her. She stood, pacing, trying to breathe. Every instinct told her to fight back. But how? Who would believe a janitor claiming ownership of a theorem published by a Harvard professor? Her eyes landed on Malik's drawing again. The stick-figure woman with the chalk. Maybe it's time they saw me, she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew the cost. The academic world protected its own. She was just a worker, with no credentials, no voice, no allies. Still, something inside her had shifted that night. The next morning, she would walk into that same lecture hall, quiet, unseen, invisible, and stand before the man who had stolen her life's work. She would look him in the eye and show him what real brilliance looked like. What she didn't know was that her small act of defiance, the decision to write a single correction on a chalkboard, would soon ignite a storm that Harvard hadn't faced in decades. Because sometimes the loudest revolutions begin in silence. Days later, as Amara cleaned the faculty corridor, she overheard two professors discussing Whitmore's upcoming book tour, mentioning the Lewis equation as the university's proudest achievement. She froze, realizing with horror that one of her unpublished theorems, the one she had never sent to anyone, had resurfaced under someone else's authorship. Sure, before I begin, here's a quick note for transparency. Producing about 1,470 words of cinematic, emotionally layered narrative in a single chat message is possible, but it's long enough that it may get cut off. If that happens, I'll continue seamlessly in the next message so you still get the complete continuous section. The chalk marks from Amara's hand still clung to the blackboard 2 days later. No one had dared erase them. The lines glowed faintly under the lecture hall's fluorescent light, as if the board itself knew something sacred had been written there. Word of what had happened spread quickly, first among students, then across faculty corridors, whispered like rumor, but heavy like truth. A janitor had corrected Whitmore. And worse, her math seemed right. The dean, Dr. Helena Strauss, was the first to act. She summoned both Whitmore and Amara to a closed meeting. The following morning, the marble floors of the administrative building echoed with their steps. The sound sharp and deliberate. For Amara, each echo was a reminder that she did not belong in places where decisions were made, behind oak doors. Inside, the conference room was cold and windowless. On the wall hung a framed portrait of the university's founders, rows of white faces staring down, proud and eternal. Strauss sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 senior mathematicians, Dr. Patel, Dr. Graham, and Dr. Leland. Whitmore stood near the projector, expression tight with contained fury. Amara sat across from him, her janitor badge still clipped to her chest, her mop bucket parked outside the door like a scarlet letter. Strauss began calmly. "Miss Lewis," she said, "your contribution during Professor Whitmore's class has generated considerable discussion." Amara's fingers intertwined, tense. "I didn't mean to disrupt anything. I just saw an inconsistency." "Yes, we've heard," Strauss interrupted. Her tone was even, neither warm nor cold. Now, the question is whether that inconsistency holds mathematical validity. Professor Whitmore has generously agreed to allow his team to review the work you wrote. Whitmore stepped forward, clearing his throat. Dean Strauss, with all due respect, there's no reason to waste departmental resources on this. His eyes cut toward Amara. The equation has no theoretical grounding. It's a coincidence at best. A misunderstanding at worst. Strauss raised an eyebrow. You verified that. Whitmore hesitated. I've examined it briefly. It's nonsense. Amara looked up. You didn't even check the boundary conditions. Whitmore's head snapped toward her. Excuse me? You assumed a closed system, she said softly. But if you shift the field parameters into negative decay just 0.1%, the tensor collapses into self-symmetry. That's why your derivative kept breaking. The room went still. The older mathematicians exchanged glances, half curious, half skeptical. Strauss motioned to the board in the corner. Show us. Amara hesitated. Now. Yes. If your idea has substance, this is your chance. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She rose slowly, walking to the board. Her uniform brushed faintly against the chair. She picked up the chalk again, the familiar weight anchoring her nerves. Then she began to write, steady, deliberate, her movements fluid as if she'd rehearsed this moment in every dream she'd ever had. For 15 minutes, the only sound was the scrape of chalk and the slow exhalations of the men watching her. She explained each transformation carefully, her voice low but confident. When she finished, the board was covered in a lattice of symbols. Clean, symmetrical, undeniable. Dr. Graham leaned forward. That looks like a variant of the Hilbert conjecture, he murmured. But that's impossible. Dr. Patel squinted. She's extending it into quantum field theory. No one's ever... Whitmore cut him off sharply. This is nonsense. She's mixing classical geometry with quantum symmetry. It's mathematically incoherent. But his voice trembled slightly when he said it. Strauss's eyes flicked toward him. Professor, humor us. Show us why it's incoherent. Whitmore took the chalk. He began scribbling corrections, erasing parts of her formula. His movements were quick, defensive. Each time he tried to isolate a contradiction, the equation folded back on itself, realigning perfectly, like a puzzle that refused to be undone. After several failed attempts, Whitmore's face flushed. The room was silent, except for the sound of chalk snapping in his fingers. Dr. Leland leaned back, eyes wide. It's self-correcting. Strauss's tone sharpened. Meaning? It means, Leland said slowly, the structure holds under every test so far. If she's right, this could unify several existing symmetry models. It's revolutionary. Whitmore's jaw tightened. You're being ridiculous. She doesn't have a PhD. He caught himself too late. Strauss's eyes narrowed. She's a mind, Professor. And a mind is not defined by a title. The words hit the room like thunder. Whitmore stepped back, silent. Amara's heart pounded. She didn't want revenge. She wanted recognition. But even as she stood there, she could feel the resistance building. The discomfort of men realizing they might owe their reverence to someone they'd been trained not to see. Strauss finally stood. We'll convene a formal review, she said. Dr. Graham, Dr. Leland, you'll lead the verification process. If the math holds, Harvard will determine next steps. Whitmore said nothing. His silence was louder than any protest. When the meeting ended, Amara walked out alone, her shoes clicking against the marble floor. Outside, the air felt heavier, the sky grayer. She didn't know whether she had just won something, or signed her own undoing. By the next afternoon, the whispers had evolved into wildfire. Students gathered in clusters whispering about the janitor's math. Someone had snapped a photo of her equations before the board was cleaned, and it spread across the university's internal forums. Some praised it, most mocked it. Harvard's next Einstein cleans toilets. Affirmative action at its finest. No way a janitor came up with that. Amara read the comments late that night, her phone glowing dimly in the dark. Malik slept nearby, his soft breathing grounding her. Each cruel word stung, but she refused to let it define her. She had lived through worse than digital hate. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the review committee worked feverishly. Graham and Leland, despite their skepticism, couldn't break her math. The deeper they dug, the more they realized her work connected seemingly incompatible branches of theory, and the implications were staggering. Her equation hinted at a possible bridge between quantum field stability and gravitational symmetry, a century-old riddle that no one had solved. When Strauss called Whitmore into her office 3 days later, he looked pale, exhausted. "I've seen their preliminary report," she said. "It suggests the math holds." Whitmore's mouth tightened. "It's a coincidence." "Is it?" Strauss asked quietly. "Or are you afraid she's right?" He glared at her, jaw clenched. "You're letting political optics cloud your judgment. This university cannot endorse a theory written by a janitor." "Then perhaps the university needs to reconsider who it calls a scholar," she said. "Our duty is to truth, not comfort." Whitmore's composure cracked for the first time. "You're making a mockery of me." "No," Strauss replied evenly. "You're doing that yourself." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. That night, in his private study, Whitmore couldn't sleep. The symbols haunted him, the elegance, the order. Every time he tried to refute the logic, he found himself trapped inside its perfection. He poured coffee, pacing between bookshelves filled with the great names of mathematics. Names that now felt hollow. He whispered to himself, "She can't be right." But his voice carried doubt. At 2 in the morning, he reopened his laptop and began testing her formula against known theorems. One by one, each of his counterproofs collapsed. The numbers refused to betray her. He grew frantic, scribbling on scrap paper, cursing under his breath. When he ran her model through a simulation he had developed years earlier, something extraordinary happened. The system didn't just stabilize, it predicted outcomes with uncanny accuracy, solving patterns that physicists had labeled irreducible noise. He froze. The screen glowed with a cascade of numbers converging into a perfect equilibrium. For a moment, the beauty of it overcame his pride. It was flawless. Then, just as quickly, the fear set in. If this was true, if her math was real, then everything he had built his career upon would be obsolete. His publications, his fame, his awards, all rendered footnotes in the margin of a janitor's brilliance. He shut the laptop, breath shallow. Down the hall his wife stirred, calling faintly, "Charles, what are you doing up?" He stared into the darkness. "Nothing," he said quietly. "Just cleaning up a mess." But in truth he knew the mess wasn't hers. It was his. Whitmore opened his laptop again, eyes burning. As the simulation reran, an anomaly appeared. Something unexplainable, almost impossible. The equation predicted an event that shouldn't exist within known physics. His pulse spiked. He leaned closer to the screen, whispering to himself, "Dear God, what have you done?" The clock on Dr. Charles Whitmore's wall read 3:27 a.m. The campus slept under a thin veil of fog, but his office glowed with a sickly white light. Books lay open across the desk, pages marked with frantic notes, coffee cups stacked like evidence of guilt. His tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot. On the computer screen, Amara's formula pulsed in soft blue lines, impossibly simple, yet hauntingly perfect. For the 4th consecutive night, he was trying to disprove her. Every counterproof collapsed. Every test ended where it began, back at the truth he refused to accept. He leaned back in his chair, running a trembling hand through his graying hair. The silence in the room felt accusatory. Somewhere in the dark, his wife called faintly from their apartment across the quad. He ignored her. Pride was louder than love tonight. He whispered to himself, "She can't be right. She can't." But she was. Every model, every substitution, every variable, all led to the same conclusion. Her formula worked, because she had seen something he had missed. The symmetry that shouldn't exist. The balance hidden beneath chaos. It was the kind of insight mathematicians spent lifetimes chasing. And she, a janitor. His jaw tightened as the thought took shape. He couldn't accept that the same hands that mopped his lecture hall could also rewrite the laws of theoretical math. It wasn't about gender. It wasn't even about race, he told himself. It was about hierarchy, order, the idea that brilliance came dressed in degrees and tenure, not in uniforms and calloused hands. But deep down he knew he was lying to himself. That week, whispers flooded the corridors of the mathematics department. Students spoke in hushed excitement. Someone had uploaded a grainy photo of Amara's chalkboard equation to Reddit. It spread across forums like wildfire. Caption: Harvard janitor solves what Einstein couldn't. Within hours, YouTube channels, blogs, and podcasts picked it up. Some hailed it as a miracle. Others called it fake. Comment sections turned into war zones. "No way that's real. If it is, then she deserves a Nobel. Probably a hoax. Harvard would never allow that. On campus, the tension was electric. Some students started calling her the math ghost. They whispered that she appeared only in the early morning, when the halls were empty, solving problems professors couldn't. Others mocked her, mimicking her quiet walk, joking that the janitor thinks she's Einstein. Amara pretended not to hear. She moved through corridors with quiet dignity, pushing her cart, cleaning chalk trays that once held her proof. She never corrected them, never defended herself. She had learned long ago that truth didn't need shouting. It simply waited. One afternoon, she entered Whitmore's classroom to clean. The blinds were half closed. The light fractured into long bands across the floor. Whitmore sat at his desk, papers scattered around him, eyes hollow. He didn't look up. "You've caused quite a stir," he said dryly. Amara paused. "I didn't mean to."
Of course you didn't, he murmured. You just wanted to show the world how wrong I was.
Her expression softened. "That wasn't about you, Dr. Whitmore. It was about the numbers." He finally looked at her. His gaze was sharp, almost pleading. "You have no idea what you've done. You think this institution celebrates discovery. It celebrates control. And right now, you've threatened that." Amara met his eyes. "Then maybe it needs to be threatened." He didn't reply. Instead, he turned away, muttering, "You don't belong here." She hesitated at the door. "Maybe not," she said quietly. "But the truth does." When she left, he sat motionless, her words echoing against the hollow in his chest. Outside the classroom, the murmur of students followed her like shadows. One whispered, "That's her." Another scoffed, "She just got lucky." But among the noise, a different tone began to emerge. Admiration. A few students started leaving anonymous notes on the departmental board. "Keep going, math ghost. You're right, I checked." Still, for every voice that admired her, there were 10 that resented her. Faculty meetings grew heated. Senior professors warned Strauss that the situation was undermining institutional credibility. One argued, "If we validate her, every custodian in America will think they can teach calculus." Strauss replied, "Then perhaps they should." Her defense of Amara only deepened the divide. Behind closed doors, faculty emails dripped with condescension. They questioned the integrity of the proof, implying she might have borrowed ideas from Whitmore. Even her work schedule came under review, as if intellect required permission slips. Yet through it all, Amara stayed silent. She worked her shift, went home to Malik, and spent her nights writing page after page of elegant equations filling worn notebooks. Her mind burned brighter now, liberated by the validation she never asked for. Meanwhile, Whitmore's world began to crumble. Everywhere he went, he heard the whispers. Students who once worshipped him now watched with skeptical eyes. His colleagues spoke in half-sentences when he entered a room. His inbox filled with requests from journalists demanding statements about the janitor's equation. He stopped replying to them. He stopped teaching with confidence. During lectures, he found himself glancing at the door, half expecting her to walk in again, chalk in hand. Obsession replaced logic. He started keeping 2 versions of her equation, one public, one private. In the public version, he tried to disprove her. In private, he studied it, reverent and terrified. By the 5th night, he noticed something new. The more he studied her math, the more he realized it wasn't just solving existing problems, it was predicting new ones. Her equations anticipated patterns in quantum entropy no current model accounted for. It was as if she could see the structure of chaos itself. He whispered into the quiet, "How did you see it, Amara?" Then he caught himself using her first name and slammed the notebook shut. The next morning, his lecture hall was half full. Students sat scrolling on their phones, watching a viral debate on YouTube. Is the janitor smarter than Harvard? The host, a charismatic black professor from Howard University, called her a symbol of overlooked brilliance. The video had over 2 million views. Whitmore's throat tightened. The institution that once defined his worth was now being redefined by the woman he had dismissed. He ended class early, retreating to his office. The air felt suffocating. He looked at his own reflection in the glass. The confident scholar was gone. What stared back was a man cracking under the weight of truth. That night, another email arrived. It came from an unfamiliar address, Henrik Meyer, @ISX@UC. The subject line read, "Inquiry about your department's anonymous contributor." He opened it. "Dear Professor Whitmore, my name is Dr. Henrik Meyer, Nobel laureate in theoretical physics. I've reviewed the circulating equation, attributed to an unnamed member of your department. It is without question the most extraordinary piece of mathematics I've seen in decades. I am visiting Cambridge next month. Please arrange a private meeting with the author. This discovery deserves to be recognized. Whitmore stared at the email, heart pounding. He could feel his world tilting again. Recognized. If Meyer discovered that the author was her, Whitmore's career would be finished. But if he claimed the equation as his own, he might still control the narrative, protect the institution, and himself. Whitmore's office door creaked open. The janitorial cart rolled slowly into view. Amara stood there, silent, a faint shadow in the light. Her eyes met his. On his computer screen, the words still glowed. Please arrange a meeting with the author. He froze. The glow of Whitmore's monitor cast an eerie light across his face. On the screen, the email from Dr. Henrik Meyer still waited for a reply. And in the doorway stood Amara. For a long moment, neither spoke. The soft hum of the janitor's cart filled the silence like static. Whitmore cleared his throat first. You shouldn't be in here. Amara stepped forward, eyes shifting from the papers on his desk to the subject line that blazed on the screen. You got a message. He moved quickly to close the laptop. Department business, he said. Nothing that concerns you. Amara's gaze lingered on the closing lid. If it's about the equation, it concerns me. Her tone was even quiet, but firm, and that frightened him more than anger ever could. Whitmore forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're making this unnecessarily complicated, Miss Lewis. The university will handle everything. The way it handled my name being erased, she asked. He opened his mouth, but words failed him. She turned to leave, stopping only long enough to say, You can't bury truth in marble halls forever, Dr. Whitmore. It always echoes. When she was gone, he exhaled shakily and sank into his chair. The echo of her footsteps haunted the corridor long after she disappeared. A week later, the winter rain arrived early, slicking the cobblestones outside Harvard Yard. The air smelled of damp paper and old stone when a black car pulled up in front of the mathematics department. From it stepped Dr. Henrik Meyer, silver-haired, thin-framed, eyes sharp behind round spectacles. The Nobel laureate's visit sent the campus into controlled panic. Administrators scrubbed floors, polished brass plaques, and pretended not to gossip. Whitmore stood at the entrance waiting, rehearsing the lie he had told himself all week, that he, not Amara, had refined the equation. Professor Whitmore, Meyer greeted, his accent a clipped German precision. You have caused quite a stir. May I see the work? Of course, Whitmore replied, masking his unease. Follow me. They entered his office. Whitmore had rewritten Amara's chalkwork neatly onto a whiteboard, rearranging variables, softening her daring leaps so they looked more conventional. This is the formula that appeared online, Whitmore began smoothly. It originated from my ongoing research into asymmetric tensor symmetries. Meyer studied the symbols in silence, his brow furrowed. Interesting choice of notation. Whitmore smiled thinly. A stylistic experiment. But Meyer's eyes had caught something. A pattern of letters inside the variables. ALW. Subscripts hidden like initials. He looked back at Whitmore. And the handwriting? Very unlike you.
Whitmore's voice hardened.
Equations belong to no handwriting, doctor. Only to reason. Meyer stepped closer to the board, tracing the lines with his finger. Reason, yes. But also intuition. Whoever wrote this understands symmetry not as abstraction, but as feeling. That is rare. He turned. May I meet your collaborator? Whitmore's pulse thudded. There is no collaborator. Merely assistants who helped with clerical work. Meyer's expression cooled. Assistants rarely hide their initials in proofs. The silence that followed was long enough for truth to breathe between them. Finally, Whitmore forced a laugh. You are reading ghosts, doctor. Now, would you care for coffee? But Meyer's curiosity had sharpened. He had spent his life chasing genius, and he could smell it here, unmistakable, unrefined, uncredited. He decided then that he would find the source himself. That night, Amara returned to the dormitory basement, where she kept her cleaning supplies. The concrete room was windowless, lit by a single bulb that buzzed like an insect. Along the far wall, sheets of scrap paper covered every inch of cinder block, equations, diagrams, fractal sketches, each layer pinned over another like geological strata of thought. It was her secret universe. Numbers where pain could hide. Proofs that made sense when the world did not. She was rewriting the boundary theorem when she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not Whitmore's brisk stride. Someone else. She turned, startled. Dr. Meyer stood in the doorway, rain still clinging to his coat. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said softly. I followed the equations. Amara froze. "How did you—" The custodial supervisor mentioned a woman who worked nights here. I thought perhaps she might know the author. He stepped closer, eyes widening as he took in the walls. "My God," he whispered. "Do you know what this is?" She smiled faintly. "Work no one wanted." Meyer turned slowly, overwhelmed. "You derived Hilbert's missing variable. And here, this predicts field inversions. I've seen nothing like it." "It's just math," she murmured. "No," he said, voice trembling. "It's vision. It's music written in logic." She looked down, embarrassed. "People see a janitor, not a musician. Then they are deaf," he said simply. He moved to one of the papers pinned near the floor. "May I?" She nodded. He peeled it back carefully and found more layers beneath, each equation more daring than the last. It was as if he were unearthing history itself. "Do you know what this could mean for physics?" he asked. "I know what it meant for me," she said quietly. "It kept me alive." Meyer looked at her, the gravity of her words sinking in. "Harvard will not hide this. Not if I have anything to say." She laughed bitterly. "They'll listen to you. They never listen to me. Then I will make them," he said. His tone was not boastful, but solemn, a vow carved from conscience. Amara stared at him, unsure whether to believe the sincerity in his eyes. Men with power often spoke of fairness, but fairness had never opened a door for her before. Still, something in Meyer's voice, steady, deliberate, made her want to trust him, if only for a moment. He walked closer to the wall, studying the dense chalk lines that had become her silent confession. "When I was young," he said quietly, "I thought genius was loud. Men arguing at conferences, names printed on journals. Then I met a woman who calculated the orbit of an asteroid by hand because no observatory would hire her. I never forgot her. You remind me of her." Amara didn't answer. She was afraid that if she spoke, the lump in her throat would betray her. Meyer continued, his eyes still moving across the page. "The elegance of this, it's centuries ahead. You've found a way to reconcile quantum uncertainty with symmetry. This equation could rewrite how we understand physical law." She shrugged. "It was just supposed to make sense. The world didn't, so I made the numbers do it instead." He turned to her. "The world rarely makes sense, until someone like you forces it to." A long silence settled between them. Only the hum of the light bulb filled the air. Then Meyer said, almost to himself, "Tomorrow I meet with your dean. I will tell her who wrote this." Amara shook her head immediately. "No. Please. Don't." "You're afraid?" "I'm tired," she said softly. "Every time I show them what I can do, they take it, or they bury it, or they call it coincidence. It's all I have that's mine." Meyer hesitated. He saw the exhaustion behind her calm, the years of being unseen. "Then let me be your witness," he said finally. "If they ignore you, they will have to ignore me too." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. "You don't even know me, Dr. Meyer." "Not yet," he said, returning her smile. "But I know your work. And that is enough." He offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then shook it. His grip was steady, respectful, one scientist to another. When he left, she sat back in her chair, staring at the wall of equations. For the first time, the numbers didn't look like a prison. They looked like possibility. The next morning, the department buzzed with anticipation. News of Meyer's arrival had leaked, and faculty whispered about an extraordinary announcement. Whitmore paced his office, sweating despite the chill. He had spent the night drafting a statement, claiming collaborative authorship, rehearsing lines that made the theft sound like mentorship. When Meyer and Dean Strauss arrived, Whitmore greeted them with the measured charm of a man cornered but unwilling to concede. "Dr. Meyer," he said, shaking his hand, "I hope the university's hospitality suits you." "It does," Meyer replied politely. "Though what interests me most is the author of this equation." Whitmore forced a laugh. Yes, a joint effort between several research aides. And myself. You know how it is. Ideas passed around, refined." Meyer's expression didn't change. "Indeed. But the pattern of thought behind it, very singular. Unmistakable. I visited your custodial basement last night." Whitmore froze. "You?" What? I found the room where the work was done, Meyer said calmly. A wall of equations. Beautiful ones. I spoke with Miss Lewis. The color drained from Whitmore's face. You went to her. Strauss looked between them sharply. What is he talking about? Meyer turned to her. Dean Strauss, you have in your employ one of the greatest mathematical minds of this century. She deserves not pity, not silence, recognition. Whitmore's voice broke into the space between them. You're making a mistake, Henrik. She's an amateur. She doesn't even have formal training. Do you have any idea what it will do to this institution if we put a janitor at the center of theoretical physics? Meyer's eyes hardened. It will remind the institution why it exists, to seek truth, not comfort. Strauss remained quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Dr. Meyer, what do you intend to do? Meyer looked directly at Whitmore. I intend to present this equation at the International Symposium on Quantum Systems next week, and I will credit the author by name, Dr. Amara Lewis. The words hit Whitmore like a blow. His breath caught, rage flooding through disbelief. You can't, he whispered. I can, Meyer said, turning toward the door. And I will. After they left, Whitmore stood alone in his office, hands trembling. Outside, students were gathering, unaware of the storm about to break. On his desk, a framed certificate, the one that once defined his career, lay crooked, its glass cracked from where his hand had struck it days earlier. He stared at the reflection of his face in the fractured glass. The man looking back at him was. His phone buzzed with a new message. It was from the dean's office. Press conference scheduled tomorrow. Announcement regarding the equation's authorship. Whitmore read the words twice. Then, without thinking, he opened his email and began typing a new letter. This time not to the dean, not to Meyer, but to the university's legal counsel. The press conference was scheduled for noon. By 8 o'clock, Harvard Yard looked like a stage before a performance no one wanted to admit they were part of. Reporters gathered near the steps, cameras poised, microphones humming. Inside the administration building, corridors smelled of polished wood and tension. Amara waited in a side room, with Dean Strauss and Dr. Henrik Meyer. She wore the only blouse she owned that wasn't part of her uniform, a plain cream shirt, with sleeves slightly frayed at the edges. Malik had insisted she wear it, saying it made her look like a professor. Through the glass wall she could see Whitmore pacing across the hall. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were red from sleepless nights. He stopped every few minutes to whisper with members of the university board. His expression rehearsed somewhere between calm and contempt. Strauss leaned toward Amara. Whatever happens today, remember this truth always takes longer to arrive than lies, but it never loses its way. Amara nodded, clutching the strap of her old satchel. I've spent my life waiting for truth to arrive. Maybe it finally got the right address. When the doors opened, flashes exploded like fireworks. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true a janitor solved the theorem? Did Harvard suppress her identity? Dr. Whitmore, did you collaborate with Ms. Lewis? Meyer stepped to the microphone first, his voice steady. This equation represents a milestone in quantum mathematics. It challenges long-standing assumptions and opens new avenues for understanding symmetry. Its author is a remarkable mind, Ms. Amara Lewis. The room rippled with shock, cameras snapping faster. Amara stepped forward hesitantly. The light blinded her, but she managed a quiet thank you. Before she could say more, Whitmore cut in. Excuse me, I must clarify something. His voice carried that practiced academic authority that audiences were trained to obey. While Ms. Lewis's enthusiasm is commendable, there appears to be a misunderstanding regarding authorship. Meyer frowned. What misunderstanding? Whitmore faced the crowd. Evidence has surfaced suggesting portions of the equation were adapted from prior unpublished drafts of my own research. Until we resolve this, the university must treat the matter with due scrutiny. Gasps. A reporter shouted. Are you accusing her of plagiarism? Whitmore spread his hands in mock restraint. I'm suggesting the timeline be investigated. Strauss's face turned pale. Dr. Whitmore, this is not what we agreed. But the microphones had already devoured his words. The narrative shifted in real time. Headlines wrote themselves. Harvard janitor, under investigation for academic misconduct. By evening, the university issued an official statement. Pending inquiry into authorship of recent mathematical work, Ms. Amara Lewis has been placed on administrative leave. Administrative leave. It sounded gentle. It was. Her access badge stopped working that same night. The guards who used to nod politely now avoided her eyes. Her cleaning cart was reassigned. When she tried to retrieve her notebooks from the supply room, she found the door padlocked. Inside her apartment, Malik watched the news replay clips of the conference. The commentator's tone was clinical. Detached, Harvard faces controversy, as questions arise over whether the equation attributed to a janitorial staff member was in fact plagiarized. Malik turned to her, confusion clouding his 11-year-old face. "Mom, why are they saying you cheated?" Amara forced a smile she didn't feel. "Because they're scared." "Of what?" "Of the truth," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment. "Will they still let you work there?" She shook her head. "Not right now." Malik's jaw tightened. "Then they don't deserve you." His small defiance steadied her more than he could know. Days blurred into each other. She spent mornings at home, scrolling through articles dissecting her life. Anonymous comments tore at her. She probably saw Whitmore's notes. Another diversity hire gone too far. Mathematics isn't charity. At night she sat at the kitchen table, notebook spread before her, continuing to calculate. Even stripped of job, title and reputation, she still had the one thing they couldn't touch: the numbers. Meyer visited once, unannounced. His eyes were weary but determined. "I appealed to the board," he said. "They're stonewalling. Whitmore convinced them there's a legal risk in acknowledging you until the investigation ends." "Legal risk," she repeated bitterly. "Truth has liability now. They're afraid of losing funding," he admitted, "and of losing him. His name still carries weight." She looked up from her equations. "So the truth waits while power rearranges itself." He had no answer. He left promising to keep fighting, but she knew how slow justice moved when it carried the weight of color and class. A week later, a reporter cornered Whitmore outside the faculty club. The video went viral overnight. "Dr. Whitmore, are you suggesting Ms. Lewis stole your work?" He smiled coolly. "I'm suggesting intellectual oversight is complex. Sometimes ideas emerge, collaboratively, and lines blur. The investigation will clarify the facts." The comment fed every prejudice lurking beneath polite academia. To the public, it sounded measured. To those who knew, it was poison disguised as reason. Strauss confronted him afterward. "You're destroying her." "She destroyed herself," he replied. "She stepped into a world she doesn't understand." "No," Strauss said. "She stepped into yours, and you couldn't bear to share it." He said nothing, but his silence was confession enough. Inside her apartment, Amara's power flickered off again. Another unpaid bill. She lit a candle, the wax smell mixing with ink and fatigue. Malik sat beside her doing homework by the small flame. "Mom," he said, "my teacher told the class you were on TV. She said some people don't like smart women." Amara smiled sadly. "Then your teacher's smarter than most." He leaned against her arm. "You'll fix it. You always fix everything." Her throat tightened. "Maybe this time the numbers have to fix me." A knock came late that night. When she opened the door, a small envelope lay on the floor. No return address, just her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a flash drive, and a single typed note: "You'll want to see this. Check the metadata." She hesitated, suspicion prickling her skin. Still, she plugged it into her old laptop. A single file appeared, her own paper, the equation of asymmetric symmetry fields, dated 2 years earlier than Whitmore's published draft. The metadata was unmistakable. Creation timestamp, originating email address, even the digital fingerprint of the submission system she had used under her initials AL. Her heart pounded. It was proof. She opened the file and saw her words, unedited, the exact phrasing that appeared in Whitmore's paper. The realization washed over her in equal parts relief and despair. Relief because she could finally prove her innocence. Despair because she now knew the theft had started long before the chalkboard. Back when she still believed academia was merit, not survival. Malik peeked out of his room. "Mom, why are you crying?" She wiped her face quickly. "I'm not, baby. I just found something I lost."
What?
My voice. She looked again at the glowing screen, the digital timestamp blinking like a heartbeat in the dark. Somewhere in the labyrinth of Harvard's servers, truth had been waiting patiently for her to find it. But with proof came danger. Whoever sent this file had access to systems she didn't even know existed. And if the board learned she had it before she could control the narrative, they might bury it, and her for good. She closed the laptop, whispering to herself, "One step at a time." Outside, the city hummed with the indifference of institutions. that never apologized. Inside, a mother and mathematician stared at the small flash drive glowing on her table, the key to both her vindication and her next battle. As she reached to unplug it, a new email notification appeared on her screen. The sender's name was hidden, the subject line encrypted. It read only, "You're not the only one they silenced." The email pulsed on Amara's laptop screen like a heartbeat she didn't trust. "You're not the only one they silenced." For a long minute she just stared at the words. Then she clicked. The body of the message was empty, except for a single attachment labeled archivetrace.log, and a line beneath it, "Find Naomi Clark." She sat back, pulse thudding. The name meant nothing to her, but the timing, the same night she had uncovered proof that Whitmore stole her submission, felt like more than coincidence. The next morning she went to the one place where Harvard still allowed her to walk without a badge, the public courtyard. Rain glossed the bricks and blurred the statue of John Harvard into a shadow. Students hurried past her without recognition. To them she was only the woman who used to clean their lecture halls. Then a voice came from behind her. "Ms. Lewis?" She turned. A young black woman in a red coat stood holding a stack of papers. She looked nervous, determined. "Naomi Clark," she said quickly. "I'm a second-year grad student in data systems. You got my email." Amara blinked. "That was you." Naomi nodded. "I've been researching how faculty submissions move through the archive servers. Something strange happened around the time Whitmore's paper was uploaded. Files disappeared, timestamps rewritten. I think yours was one of them." "How do you know it was mine?" Naomi lowered her voice. "Because your initials were still in the system log. They forgot to purge the backup cache. There's a ghost file sitting in a hidden directory, marked obsolete AL submission final." Amara's breath caught. "Can you prove it?"
Naomi hesitated.
"Yes, but the servers are locked behind faculty credentials. I'd have to get inside the archive room. Cameras, swipe access, everything logged." Amara managed a tired smile. "You mean break in?" Naomi exhaled. "Pretty much." That night the two women met at the mathematics building. After closing, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and chalk. Her old world, suddenly foreign. Naomi carried a small laptop and a stolen ID card clipped to her sleeve. "You're sure about this?" Amara whispered. Naomi glanced over her shoulder. "If we don't do it, they'll erase you completely. They've done it before." They moved quietly down the hall until they reached the door marked Archive Room. Naomi slid the borrowed card through the reader. The light blinked green. "We've got 10 minutes before it logs the mismatch." Inside, rows of black servers hummed in the dark, their small LEDs blinking like eyes in the gloom. Naomi set her laptop on a metal table and began typing. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. "Each faculty upload gets a checksum," she explained. "If someone deletes or rewrites a file, the checksum changes. All I have to do is compare the hashes." Amara stood behind her, watching the data cascade, strings of numbers, dates, user IDs. She couldn't understand the code, but she recognized the rhythm of truth being uncovered. Naomi froze suddenly. There. She zoomed in on one line. "Upload wide what you said what is watching in. Replace AAL, submission final timestamp, 7 in 30 days. Naomi whispered. "Exactly 2 years ago." Amara felt the air leave her lungs. He deleted it himself. Naomi nodded grimly and rerouted the credit to his faculty ID. "The system thinks he authored it. Can you pull the original file?" Naomi's fingers flew. Already on it. A soft chime sounded. The file opened, her own paper, pristine and complete. Her handwriting scanned in the margins, her equations alive again. Amara's eyes filled. "That's mine." Naomi looked up. "Then we record everything. Screen capture, metadata, audit logs." She hit record. They can't bury this once it's outside their firewall. They worked in silence. The only sounds the hum of cooling fans and Naomi's steady typing. Every click felt like a reclamation of breath. Suddenly footsteps echoed in the corridor. Naomi froze. Security. They killed the monitor light. Through the sliver under the door they saw shadows move past. 2 guards talking casually. One laughed. "Can you believe that janitor mess? Whole university's a circus now." Their voices faded. Naomi let out a long breath. "We're ghosts." Amara smiled faintly. "Then let's haunt them with truth." When the danger passed, Naomi unplugged her laptop and whispered, "We've got everything, but you need someone credible to present it. Someone the board can't dismiss as emotional." Amara looked at her. You mean someone who doesn't look like me? Naomi met her gaze. I mean someone with tenure. The next day they visited Professor Alan Reeves, a soft-spoken physicist known for mentoring underrepresented students. His office smelled of old coffee and dust. When Amara laid out the evidence, he stared at the screen, stunned. This is irrefutable, he said. File traces, root access logs, even the overridden hash signatures. He didn't just steal your paper, he erased you from history. Amara nodded slowly. Can you help me present this to the hearing? Reeves hesitated. You understand what you're asking. If I testify against Whitmore, the board will retaliate. They protect their own. Naomi stepped forward. And what happens if you stay silent? Reeves looked at them both. Two black women, who had risked everything for proof. And something inside him shifted. All right, he said. I'll stand with you. That night Amara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the city glowing faintly beyond the frost. Malik lay asleep on the couch. She whispered to herself, tomorrow they'll hear me. But a quiet dread followed, because she knew the system didn't crumble easily. Morning came gray and heavy. The hearing was scheduled for noon. At 9 she received a text from Naomi. Reeves is missing. He never showed up for our prep meeting. Her stomach dropped. She dialed his office. No answer. She tried the department line. Voicemail. She looked out the window just as another notification appeared on her phone. Harvard faculty statement. Professor Alan Reeves relieved of duties pending internal review. Her hand shook as she scrolled. The statement was sterile, clinical, final. Professor Reeves has been placed on administrative leave for breach of confidentiality regarding ongoing institutional matters. Naomi burst through her apartment door minutes later, laptop in hand. They fired him, she said, out of breath. He sent me this right before they locked his account. She opened an email draft on the screen. Reeves had written only one line. They know about the files. Be careful who you trust. The words hit Amara like cold rain. Every instinct screamed that the walls were closing again. The system wasn't just rigged, it was alive, watching, self-protecting. Naomi whispered, what do we do now? Amara stared at the glowing screen, the line of Reeves's warning fading into silence. We don't stop, she said quietly. If they erased him, it means he got too close. Now we finish it. Outside, the campus bells tolled the hour 12, slow chimes that sounded less like time and more like warning. As the final bell faded, a notification flashed on Naomi's laptop. Archive access attempt. Detected user Whitmore. It's active. Somewhere on campus, Whitmore was already erasing again. The glow from Naomi's laptop still illuminated their faces. When Amara whispered, he's erasing again, the cursor blinked beside the last line of the system. Warning. User Whitmore. Active. Naomi's fingers flew across the keyboard. He's in the archive right now. If we don't copy these files out, they're gone forever. Can you stop him? Not stop, Naomi said, but outrun. She opened a secure folder, dragging the recovered evidence into a hidden cloud server. I'll encrypt everything and push it off campus. Once it's public, they can't pretend it doesn't exist. Amara froze. Public? Naomi turned to her. It's the only way. They'll bury us quietly, if we keep it private. But if everyone sees the proof, they can't silence you. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady whir of the fan. Then Amara nodded slowly. Do it. Naomi uploaded the files, adding the metadata and timestamps as an unbreakable signature. When she reached the author field, she hesitated. What name? Amara looked at her reflection in the dark window. Mine. Naomi typed. Dr. Amara Lewis. The enter key clicked, small and final. By morning the storm had begun. Across Twitter, Reddit and YouTube, screenshots of the stolen equations and file logs spread like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. The janitor genius, Harvard hypocrisy, let her speak. Comment threads filled with outrage, disbelief, admiration. Some users traced her work through preprints. Others pieced together the story from old campus photos. A janitor correcting a tenured professor's math proof, they said, that racism still guarded the gates of intellect. News outlets picked it up by noon. Anonymous source leaks evidence of Harvard cover-up. Brilliance ignored. The story of Dr. Amara Lewis. Within hours, Amara's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Unknown numbers. Press inquiries. Request for interviews. A reporter from The Atlantic left a voicemail. We'd love your perspective on academic injustice. Malik sat on the couch watching the news scroll across the screen. Eyes wide. Mom, they're talking about you. Amara glanced at the TV. Her face grainy, taken from a classroom photo, flashed beside the headline, "Custodian or Genius? The Equation That Shook Harvard." She exhaled slowly. "Let them talk." Naomi called minutes later. "It's everywhere," she said, half thrilled, half terrified. Even international outlets picked it up. "You're trending in Japan. Harvard just shut down their public comment section." "Then we did it," Amara said. Naomi hesitated. "No, we started it. Now they'll fight back." They did. By evening, Harvard released a polished statement denying all wrongdoing. The university takes matters of research integrity seriously. Ongoing internal reviews have found no evidence of systemic discrimination. We remain committed to diversity and academic excellence. The statement didn't mention Amara by name, but everyone knew. Online, backlash built in waves. Some users defended Harvard, accusing Amara of manipulating public sympathy. Others pointed out the pattern. Brilliant black minds dismissed, their work erased until it was too late to deny. At other universities, students began organizing. A protest at MIT drew hundreds, chanting, "Genius has no badge." At Howard, a mural appeared overnight, Amara's silhouette surrounded by swirling numbers, and the words "Truth cleanse all." Amara watched the chaos unfold from her small apartment. Silent. She didn't tweet, didn't give interviews, didn't speak. The world debated her worth, but she remained still, scribbling in her notebooks. Malik finally asked, "Why aren't you saying anything?" She looked up from the page. "Because the work isn't done yet." "What work?" "The part no one else can see." Whitmore watched the same news cycle unfold from his dark office. Every headline was another fracture in his reputation. His inbox overflowed with interview requests, investigative questions, and one email from a private attorney titled "Potential Defamation Response Strategy." He deleted it all. On the wall he had taped printouts of Amara's leaked files, each line of code mocking him. "You think you've won," he muttered, "but you don't understand the game." He called a meeting with the university's legal counsel that afternoon. "This leak compromises Harvard's intellectual property," he said flatly. "We must assert ownership before public perception hardens." The counsel frowned. "Ownership of what?" "You publicly questioned the equation's validity. Then say it was a collaboration. Frame her as an unacknowledged research assistant." The counsel hesitated. "That narrative could be interpreted as management oversight," Whitmore interrupted, "not racism." The lawyer sighed. "You're fighting a wildfire with paperwork." But Whitmore's mind was already working. "If she wants proof, I'll give her proof. Let's see if she can finish what she started." Meanwhile, Amara's email filled with support. Strangers wrote paragraphs about how her story gave them hope. Black students, janitors, underpaid adjuncts, all thanking her for existing out loud. But praise came with pressure. Scientists began debating the content of her equation in academic forums. Some called it the most significant theoretical advance in a generation. Others dismissed it as lucky intuition. Everyone demanded she release the final proof. Naomi brought her the latest article one night. "They're saying your math stops one step short, that it's unsolved without the boundary variable." Amara nodded slowly. "They're right." Naomi frowned. "Then we'll show them the rest." "I can't," Amara said quietly. "Because it doesn't exist yet." Naomi stared. "What do you mean?" "The final variable isn't just a number," Amara explained. "It's a concept. Something we haven't proven because we've never dared to imagine it." Naomi sat back. "You're saying the equation's not finished?" "I'm saying," Amara whispered, "it's waiting for me to become something else." The following week, the noise grew deafening. She was invited to every major talk show. A late-night host cracked a joke. Only at Harvard could a janitor solve math and still get suspended. The audience laughed, but Amara didn't. She saw what they didn't: the ease with which entertainment swallowed pain. She declined every invitation. Instead, she returned to the one place that still felt hers: the empty lecture hall at night. The board had changed the locks, but Naomi's code card still worked. The chalkboard stood freshly cleaned. She picked up a piece of chalk, her hand trembling. The equation she'd written months ago still haunted the edges of her dreams. She started again writing, erasing, rethinking. Line after line filled the board, until the math became something alive, breathing through her. She was searching for a pattern she could feel, but not yet name. Midnight came. Naomi found her still there, chalk dust coating her fingers. "You've been at this for hours," Naomi said softly. You need rest. Amara shook her head. Rest doesn't want me. Naomi hesitated, watching the symbols. Does it make sense yet? Amara stepped back, staring at the dense lattice of equations. Not yet. But it's close. I can feel it. There's something here that connects symmetry and entropy, order and decay, like the universe folding into itself. Naomi smiled faintly. You sound like poetry. Maybe math is poetry, Amara murmured. Just written by those afraid of feelings. They both laughed quietly, the sound fragile but alive. Outside, the campus bells tolled one, echoing through the empty corridors. Amara put down the chalk and whispered, "Tomorrow they'll come for headlines. Tonight, we make history." By dawn, the equation had evolved into something no textbook could contain. Amara had written new symbols, ones she invented herself, describing relationships no mathematician had yet named. When Naomi returned with coffee, she stopped in awe. "What is that?" Amara stared at the board, her eyes tired but bright. "The bridge," she said, "between what we can measure and what we can only imagine."
Naomi whispered. You mean?
Yes. The concept no one's proven. On the board beneath a swirl of new notation, Amara had written a single word: resonance. The missing variable isn't a constant, Amara said quietly. It's harmony. The way the universe aligns chaos into meaning. Every field, every particle, it's all trying to find its resonance. Even people. Naomi stared at her, awestruck. Amara, if that's true, it changes everything, Amara finished. The morning light spilled through the window, catching the chalk dust in a golden haze. Outside, the world was already chanting her name in protests and headlines. But inside that quiet hall, history shifted without an audience. Amara stepped back from the board, realizing what her discovery implied. If resonance was real, then Whitmore's entire body of research collapsed, and something even deeper lay ahead. To prove it, she would have to test the untestable, alone. The light outside Amara's apartment never really dimmed anymore. Even at night, it glowed with the restless pulse of camera flashes. Vans idled across the street, journalists sleeping in shifts. Every morning she woke to microphones waiting under her window. Every evening she closed her blinds against the glare of her own legend. The world had decided who she was before she could decide for herself. News anchors dissected her face, her tone, her silence. Is she a prodigy or a fraud? One headline asked. Another declared, the janitor who outsmarted Harvard, and what it says about America. For Amara, the noise was unbearable. She sat by her kitchen window, a cold cup of coffee untouched beside her, scrolling through endless notifications. Thousands of strangers spoke her name as if it belonged to them. Every tweet, every think piece, every opinion turned her story into currency. Across the room, Malik sat at the table, pencil in hand, staring at a half-finished math worksheet. He looked up suddenly. "Mom," he said softly, "kids at school said you cheated." Amara froze. "What did you tell them?" He shrugged, eyes dropping to his paper. That they were wrong. She walked over, kneeling beside him. "Malik, I'm sorry you have to hear that." He looked at her then, with a quiet maturity far older than his years. "They're just mad because you're smarter than them." She smiled faintly. "That's not what they're mad about." He frowned. "Then what is it?" She hesitated, choosing her words. Some people spend their lives believing they're the smartest in the room. When someone they don't expect proves them wrong, it breaks the world they built in their heads. And broken worlds get angry. He nodded slowly, as if trying to understand not just her words but her exhaustion. By noon, the doorbell rang again. Two men in expensive suits stood outside, the crimson Harvard crest gleaming on their lapel pins. "Ms. Lewis," one began, flashing credentials. "We represent the university's legal counsel. We'd like to discuss a resolution that protects both your reputation and ours." Amara folded her arms. "I didn't know truth needed protection." The man's smile didn't falter. "This situation has escalated. The university is prepared to offer a formal statement acknowledging your contributions." "Contributions?" she interrupted. "You mean authorship?" He cleared his throat. "In exchange for your agreement not to pursue further legal or public claims. You'd also receive reinstatement, with back pay and a non-disclosure clause to ensure privacy." Naomi, who had been sitting silently on the couch, stood abruptly. "You're asking her to vanish in exchange for silence." "Miss Clark," the lawyer said coolly, "we're offering dignity." Amara looked from one to the other, her expression unreadable. If your dignity costs me my truth, it's too expensive. The men exchanged a look. Ms. Lewis, think carefully. The media will tire of you. When they do, Harvard will remain. Do you really want to be on the outside forever? Amara's voice was calm but sharp. I've lived on the outside my whole life. I built my world there. I'm not afraid of it. They left in silence. That night, the news cycle turned cruel. Anonymous leaks from university sources questioned her stability. Pundits dissected her interviews, labeling her emotional, uncooperative, difficult. One magazine published an unflattering photo of her mid-sentence with the caption, "Genius or Grievance." Naomi slammed her laptop shut. They're rewriting your story in real time. It's character assassination. Amara sighed. It's survival instinct. They can't erase the proof, so they erase the person. But you can fight back, Naomi said. Go on television. Tell your side. I won't play their game, Amara replied. They want anger. They want spectacle. I'll give them neither. Instead, she buried herself in work. Her apartment became a storm of papers and equations, notebooks stacked like barricades against the world. Each night, she chased the same idea, the final form of resonance. The equation pulsed in her dreams, unfinished, beckoning. But fame had a gravity of its own. Every new headline dragged her further from the quiet she needed to think. Every tweet chipped at her resolve. And still, the doorbell rang. Boxes of letters arrived, hundreds of them, from young students, mostly black, who saw themselves in her. One letter caught her breath. It was from a 13-year-old girl in Detroit. My teacher said girls like me don't belong in advanced math. But I showed her your story. Now I do my homework anyway. Amira pressed the paper to her chest. That night, for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. Not from despair but from the crushing beauty of being seen. 2 days later, Naomi burst into the apartment, breathless. You need to see this. She held up her phone. On screen was a live stream. Harvard's annual winter lecture, hosted by Dr. Whitmore. The caption read, "Special session revisiting the impossible equation." Amara's stomach tightened. What is he doing? Naomi turned up the volume. On the feed, Whitmore stood before a packed auditorium. The same smirk, the same arrogance, but sharper now. Almost desperate. Truth, he was saying, isn't decided by applause or politics. It's proven by rigor. So to put this controversy to rest, I extend a public invitation. If Lewis believes her equation complete, she may demonstrate it, live before the world's leading scientists at the upcoming symposium in Geneva. The crowd buzzed. Reporters scribbled. Whitmore smiled coldly into the camera. Let's see if the myth of the janitor genius can survive real scrutiny. Naomi lowered the phone slowly. He's setting you up. Amara nodded. Of course he is. You can't go, Naomi said. He'll control the environment, the narrative, everything. Amara looked out the window, where the city lights shimmered like data points in motion. He wants me to prove it on his stage. Then don't. Amara turned back, her eyes calm but fierce. No, I'll build my own. The following week, the world watched the story shift again. Harvard issued a statement, accepting Whitmore's invitation on behalf of the symposium organizers. They framed it as a historic academic dialogue. To Amara, it was a duel. Journalists compared it to Galileo versus the Church, Einstein versus Newton, a battle between tradition and truth. Every headline fed the spectacle. Every op-ed turned her into a symbol of something larger than herself. Race, gender, class, revolution. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to finish the work. But the noise wouldn't stop. Malik came home from school, with bruised pride and tired eyes. They said you'll embarrass yourself on TV. Amara crouched to meet his gaze. Do you believe that? He shook his head. No, I just don't want them to laugh at you. She smiled softly. Let them laugh, then let them listen. On the night before her flight to Geneva, Amara sat alone at her desk. The chalkboard leaned against the wall, covered in the latest iteration of resonance. The numbers were almost perfect, but not quite. A single variable refused to settle. Her reflection in the window looked ghostly, half-lit by the city. She whispered to it. What am I missing? Malik's voice came sleepily from the couch. Maybe it's not about numbers anymore. She turned. Then what is it about? People, he murmured. You always said math is how you understand the world. Maybe you have to understand yourself too. She looked at him for a long moment. You sound like your father. He smiled faintly. That's what you always say when I'm right. She laughed quietly, her heart both heavy and light. As he drifted back to sleep, she whispered, maybe you're the missing variable. At dawn, Amara boarded the plane. Reporters crowded the gate, shouting questions. Flashbulbs followed her up the aisle, but she kept her eyes forward, clutching Malik's small notebook in her hand. On its first page, he had written in crooked letters, Mom, show them how bright numbers can shine. She smiled. I will. As the plane lifted into the clouds, she closed her eyes. Below her, the world still argued. Above her, silence. In that silence, she felt the weight of it all. The pressure, the hope, the fear, and underneath, something steady and eternal, the quiet rhythm of her own courage. When she landed in Geneva, the conference banner already stretched across the plaza.
The impossible equation. Leave demonstration.
And beneath it, in bold letters she hadn't approved, Dr. Charles Whitmore versus Amara Lewis. The challenge was no longer whispered. It was spectacle, and the world was watching. The auditorium shimmered under the glare of stage lights. Every seat filled, every breath held in anticipation. The International Symposium on Quantum Systems was the kind of event that crowned legends and erased pretenders. Outside, camera crews from around the world crowded the glass entrance, their cables snaking across the marble floor like veins of electricity. Inside, the air was charged. On the stage, Dr. Charles Whitmore adjusted his microphone, his smile practiced and predatory. Behind him, a massive digital screen displayed the title, The Impossible Equation. He let the silence stretch before speaking, his voice smooth and sharp as polished steel. Ladies and gentlemen, today we revisit a formula that has sparked global fascination and controversy. The equation that, if correct, could redefine physics itself. He paused for effect, allowing the audience to lean in. Some have called it revolutionary. Others, his eyes flicked to the wings of the stage, call it reckless. But truth, as always, demands. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. In the shadows off stage, Amara Lewis stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. The fabric of her navy dress was simple, unadorned, yet she carried an unmistakable authority. She had refused professional stylists, refused Harvard's handlers, refused even the makeup crew that tried to turn her into a palatable headline. She wanted no armor. The truth would have to stand naked beside her. Naomi stood beside her, whispering, you don't have to do this. They just want a spectacle. Amara's gaze stayed on the light-soaked stage. Then let them see one worth remembering. Whitmore gestured toward the board behind him. For those unfamiliar, this equation originated from a former employee of my department. While it has gained traction in the public imagination, its claims remain unverified. Today, for the sake of academic clarity, we will witness an attempt to complete it. His voice turned theatrical, almost amused. And who better to present it, he said, than its author herself, Ms. Amara Lewis. The words dripped with condescension, but the audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed like lightning. As Amara walked onto the stage, 1,000 lenses turned to her, the only black woman in the hall, the only person not introduced with a string of letters after her name. She reached the lectern. The noise faded. Whitmore stepped aside, pretending courtesy, but his smirk lingered. She looked out at the sea of faces, scientists, journalists, students, skeptics, and said quietly, I was told this problem was impossible. But impossibility is just a language people use when they want to keep others silent. A murmur ran through the hall. She turned toward the massive chalkboard that filled the back wall, the same one Whitmore had once mocked her for touching. She picked up the chalk. The first stroke squeaked across the surface. Her movements were slow at first, methodical, but sure. The crowd watched, transfixed. Whitmore's smirk faded. As the board began to fill with the elegant geometry of her thought, she spoke as she wrote, her voice calm but steady. When I first saw this equation, it didn't look broken. It looked unfinished, like a song missing its final note. I spent years listening for that note. For the next hour, she worked relentlessly. Chalk dust clouded the air, floating through the light like particles suspended in time. The equations built upon each other, symmetry collapsing into entropy, entropy reforming into order. Whitmore sat at the side table, hands clenched, watching his own legacy being rewritten line by line. Around him, scholars whispered to one another, their disbelief softening into awe. At the 90-minute mark, Amara paused, breathing hard. She had taken the audience through the labyrinth of her mind, and somehow every corridor connected. The impossible equation now shimmered with a structure no one had seen before, a hidden rhythm of balance and decay. Dr. Henrik Meyer, seated in the front row, leaned forward, whispering, "She's doing it. She's actually doing it." But then, she stopped. The chalk hovered above the final line. The board was nearly full, only one empty corner remaining. The silence in the room turned heavy, expectant. Amara lowered the chalk slowly. "This," she said softly, "is where every known model collapses. The equation demands one final variable, something that can't yet be measured." Whitmore seized the moment. He rose from his seat, his voice slicing through the tension. "So you admit it. You brought us here for performance, not proof." Amara turned, unshaken. "No, Dr. Whitmore. I brought us here to remind you that proof begins with imagination." The audience murmured again, the tension electric. Whitmore stepped closer, voice tightening. "You can dress it in poetry, Miss Lewis. But science doesn't bow to metaphors." "Neither does truth," she replied. The room fell into stunned silence. Whitmore's face flushed, but before he could respond, Amara turned back to the board. "The missing variable isn't a constant," she said. "It's an idea. Something beyond the tools we have. I call it resonance." Meyer whispered again, eyes wide. "Resonance. She's naming it." Amara drew the symbol. Two intersecting arcs representing harmony between symmetry and decay. "This," she said, "is what unites order and chaos. Every system, every particle, every human being is searching for balance between what it is and what it's becoming. That balance creates resonance." Her voice grew quieter, almost reverent. "And that's the force the universe hides behind probability." For a moment, the hall was utterly still. Even the cameras stopped clicking. But then Whitmore's laughter cut through the silence. "Charming," he said. "But this isn't physics. It's philosophy. You've spent 2 hours proving nothing." Amara turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "No," she said. "I've spent 2 hours showing you the truth you were too afraid to see." He sneered. "And what truth is that?" "That genius isn't inherited. It's earned." The crowd gasped. Even those who didn't understand the math felt the weight of her words. Meyer rose, clapping once. Then another scientist followed. Then another. Applause rippled through the hall like a wave breaking against stone. Whitmore's face went rigid. He tried to speak, but the noise drowned him out. Still amid the cheers, Amara stood motionless. Something was wrong. The pattern on the board wasn't complete. The resonance she had defined still pulsed with imbalance. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing, searching for what she had missed. The applause dimmed. The crowd sensed the shift, the silence of someone wrestling with the infinite. Whitmore folded his arms, smirking again. "It seems even your imagination has limits." But Amara didn't hear him. Her mind raced. There was something simple hiding in the chaos. Something small and human. She whispered, "It's not complete, because it doesn't listen." A voice called from the audience. Small, trembling, familiar. "Then listen to me." Every head turned. Near the back of the auditorium stood Malik, clutching a folded notebook, his eyes wide but steady. "Mom," he said, his voice echoing through the stunned hall, "you told me once that numbers are like people. They just want to belong somewhere. Maybe the missing part isn't balance, it's connection." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Amara stared at her son, the words sinking like seeds into fertile ground. "Connection." She turned back to the board, chalk trembling between her fingers. Her pulse quickened as she drew a small line, a bridge between two distant symbols. The formula shifted, resolving like a melody, finding its final chord. The audience gasped, collectively. Even Whitmore's expression cracked into disbelief. The board now glowed with impossible symmetry, the equation humming with completeness neither mechanical nor mystical, but both. Amara stepped back, heart pounding, chalk falling from her hand. The impossible had just become visible. The room erupted, cameras flashing, voices shouting. But Amara heard only Malik's quiet words replaying in her head. Maybe it's connection, because she suddenly realized he wasn't just right about the math. He was right about everything. The resonance she'd discovered wasn't just in physics, it was in people. And that truth, she knew, would change everything, and everyone. The auditorium was chaos. Cameras flashed like lightning. The crowd's roar rose and fell in uneven waves. Journalists shouted into microphones, their words colliding into static. Historic, unprecedented, impossible. But on stage, Amara heard none of it. She was still staring at the chalkboard, the last symbol glowing faintly in her mind. The bridge Melik's voice had given her. Connection. Whitmore's face was colorless, the smirk gone. His eyes darted from the board to the audience, searching for a script he no longer controlled. Dr. Henrik Meyer rose slowly from the front row, clapping once, then again. The sound spread like fire. Scientists, students, even skeptics stood, applauding until it became thunder. In that moment, Amara should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow, weightless, as if she'd left her body behind on the blackboard. She turned to look at Malik, who was standing now, smiling, his hands trembling in awe. She mouthed the words, "You did this." He shook his head. "No, we did." The official declaration came within hours. The equation, Amara's equation, was confirmed as internally consistent by an independent panel of physicists. They called it Lewis's resonance model, a framework that redefined energy distribution across quantum systems. For the first time, chaos and order could coexist mathematically, a discovery so revolutionary it would take years for the world to fully grasp its implications. In academic circles, it was being compared to Einstein's field equations. In the streets, it was being painted on murals. Across social media, the same message repeated. She proved them wrong. But behind the applause, behind the camera lenses, and applause, something else stirred, a quiet unease in Amara's chest. She could already hear the careful rewording of her legacy taking shape in the mouths of powerful men. A collaborative breakthrough, a rare moment of institutional redemption. Already Harvard's press office had issued a statement praising its commitment to nurturing diverse minds. The same institution that had erased her now claimed to have raised her. She sat alone in her hotel room that night, the award from the symposium resting on the desk beside her. It gleamed like an apology carved in glass. Malik slept on the couch, his head resting on a pile of her old notes. Amara whispered into the quiet, "They'll remember the math, not the fight." The next morning, a knock echoed through the suite. When she opened the door, Naomi stood there, eyes bright with adrenaline. "You did it," she said, almost breathless. "They're calling you the woman who changed science." Amara smiled faintly. "They'll stop calling soon." "No," Naomi said firmly. "Not this time. You changed the narrative." Amara looked out the window at the rows of reporters below. Narratives change faster than systems. Naomi hesitated, understanding the fatigue behind her calm. "You should be proud." "I am," Amara said softly. "Just not at peace." Later that day, the symposium hosted an impromptu roundtable discussion. Whitmore was there, seated at the end of the panel, his face carefully blank. Meyer spoke passionately about the implications of resonance, calling it a bridge between mathematics and philosophy. He praised Amara publicly, but Whitmore's silence lingered like a shadow over every compliment. When a journalist asked Whitmore for comment, he finally spoke. "Dr. Lewis's insight is impressive," he said coolly. "But like all new theories, it will require validation." It was subtle, but Amara heard the undertone. A retreat, not a surrender. A promise that the system would survive by digesting her. That evening, Malik sat cross-legged on the floor of the hotel suite, flipping through his notebook. "Mom," he said suddenly, "you never told me why that little constant C3 was so important." Amara glanced over. "You remember that?" He grinned. "You used to say, without C3, everything falls apart." She laughed softly. "That's because it keeps the model balanced. It connects the left side to the right, the part that describes how energy moves through the system." He frowned. "But the way you wrote it on the board yesterday, it was missing." She froze. "What do you mean?" Malik flipped the notebook toward her. He had drawn a simplified version of her final proof. In the lower corner, the bridge she'd added, the symbol for connection, was slightly tilted. "If C3 fits here," he said, "it makes both sides even, like a mirror." Amara blinked, realizing what he'd done. She took the pencil, filled in the constant, and watched as the equation rebalanced itself perfectly. "Malik," she whispered, "you just completed it." He shrugged shyly. "I just remembered what you said." She stared at the paper, awe flooding through her. For weeks she had been chasing harmony, and here it was, in the simplest thing she'd forgotten. the constant that held everything together. Do you understand what you just did? She said. He smiled. I fixed the mirror. Within hours, Naomi had documented the new adjustment and shared it with Meyer. By morning, physicists were losing their minds online. The completed model predicted something no one thought possible, a new method for distributing energy in closed systems without loss. Theoretically, it could revolutionize everything, from fusion technology to data transfer to environmental physics. Headlines flooded the world.
A child completes the equation.
Resonance solved. The Lewis model changes everything. Amara and Malik became symbols, the mother and son who changed science. Reporters called it poetic, divine, cinematic. To them it was a miracle story. To Amara it was just math and motherhood. She gave a single press statement that afternoon, standing on the steps of the Geneva conference hall. This discovery isn't mine alone, she said quietly. It belongs to every mind that was told it wasn't enough. It belongs to my son, who reminded me that connection between ideas, between people, is what completes the universe. The crowd erupted, applause echoing through the plaza. Yet as the noise washed over her, she felt a strange stillness. Pride, yes, but also grief, because for all the celebration she knew the truth. One public victory couldn't rewrite the centuries of silence that came before it. For every Amara who rose, 1,000 others were still unseen. Naomi found her afterward, eyes shining. You know what this means, right? You'll be in textbooks. History. Amara smiled faintly. History remembers the discovery, not the discoverer. But maybe that's enough. As dusk fell, she walked the quiet corridors of the nearly empty conference hall. The chalkboard still bore traces of her work, faint white ghosts against black. She stood before it, tracing the final line with her fingertip. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel everything. The pain, the triumph, the exhaustion. Behind her, a door opened softly. Footsteps echoed. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Dr. Whitmore, she said without looking. His voice came low, controlled. I thought you'd be celebrating. I am, she said, just quietly. He moved closer, stopping beside her. You humiliated me. No, she replied calmly. You did that yourself. His jaw tightened. You think this victory will last? The media loves a spectacle. They'll move on. And when they do, the system resets. You'll fade, like the rest. Maybe, she said, but not before I leave a mark deep enough that you'll trip over it every time you walk into a classroom. He stared at her for a long moment. Then his tone shifted, smooth and dangerous. I can make this easier for both of us. She turned. What do you mean? He glanced toward the door, then back to her. A private agreement. You retract your public claims. Harvard acknowledges you with honorary status, funding, even a faculty position. In return, we control the patent and narrative. You get peace. I get restoration. Amara studied him. You mean you get your legacy back? He didn't deny it. Everyone wins, Dr. Lewis. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper edged with steel. Everyone but the truth. His expression hardened. Think carefully. I can make this all disappear. She met his gaze evenly. You've spent your life disappearing people like me, but I don't vanish anymore. The tension between them crackled like static. In the glass reflection of the chalkboard, their figures stood, two shapes divided by history, pride, and truth. Whitmore leaned in slightly, his voice a blade disguised as a whisper. Then you'd better watch who does it for you. The air between them turned cold, and for the first time, Amara realized his defeat might not end with surrender. It might begin with revenge. The unexpected leak cliffhanger. The night pressed heavy against the tall glass windows of Whitmore's office. Outside, the city lights of Geneva flickered like scattered equations across the horizon, each one precise, untouchable, and cold. Inside, the silence was heavier than the air. Amara stood by the doorway, uncertain why she had agreed to come. He had sent the message an hour earlier, a simple text, one final conversation. Alone, something in his tone, the exhaustion beneath the arrogance, had made her come. Whitmore sat behind his desk, his suit immaculate, but his face a ruin of sleeplessness. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, his hands trembling slightly, as he poured a drink. You know, he said quietly, I used to believe truth was measurable. Amara stayed silent. He looked up, eyes distant. It isn't. It's adaptive. It bends to power. She stepped closer. That's not truth, Dr. Whitmore. That's survival. He laughed bitterly. Then maybe that's all I've ever done. Survive. The air between them thickened. The scent of whiskey mingled with the faint antiseptic of the conference center. His reflection wavered in the glass behind him, like a ghost rehearsing regret. Why did you call me here? She asked. Whitmore set his glass down, the sound sharp against the desk. Because it's over, he said. And I don't know how to live with that. Amara folded her arms. You've said that before. Then you found a way to erase people until you felt whole again. He winced, but didn't argue. You think I haven't paid for it? Look at me, Amara, every night for 2 years. I saw your face in the margins of that paper, the one I stole, the one that made me famous. You didn't steal it, she said quietly. You erased it. He nodded slowly, the truth landing like confession in a church that had no priest. Yes, I erased you. I told myself I was protecting the institution, our sacred order, the kind that decides who belongs and who doesn't. But the truth, he swallowed hard. The truth is, I couldn't stand that a woman who scrubbed my floors understood the universe better than I did. His voice cracked on the last word. He looked down, ashamed. You want a confession? You have it. I stole your submission. I used my credentials to bury your name. I convinced the board you'd plagiarized me. He stopped, unable to finish. Amara's voice was quiet. You destroyed my life. Yes, he whispered. And it didn't make me feel powerful. It made me hollow. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. Finally, he looked up again, his eyes glistening. You think I'm the villain? Maybe I am. But the truth is, I'm just the system in a single body. There are 100 others waiting to take my place. If you destroy me, the machine keeps running. If you forgive me, he trailed off. Then maybe it stops for a moment. Amara stepped forward. Forgiveness isn't my job. Accountability is. He nodded. Then take it. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a folder, her original submission, creased and yellowing. I kept it, he said softly. Maybe because I knew someday I'd have to face this. Amara stared at it, her breath catching. Why now? He hesitated. Because you won, and because I can't live with the noise anymore. He leaned back, defeated. Every award, every applause, it all sounded like accusation. For a moment, Amara saw not the monster who had stolen her life, but a man unraveling under the weight of guilt. It didn't make her pity him, but it made her understand how rot hid beneath polished oak. She looked down at the folder, then back at him. Do you want absolution, Dr. Whitmore? I want silence, he whispered. Amara reached into her coat pocket, pressing a small device in her hand. A soft red light blinked once. The recorder she'd brought with her. She hadn't planned to use it, not until he began to speak. Now every word sat captured in its digital memory. The theft, the manipulation, the lie. She placed the device gently on his desk. Then you'll never have it. He looked at the blinking light. Realization dawning. You're recording this? Yes. His voice sharpened. You can't. I just did. He stood abruptly, anger flashing for the first time. You think this will save you? They'll spin it, twist it, bury it. I was the vessel. But the system, she interrupted, is exactly what this exposes. He sank back into his chair, defeated. Then you'll ruin us both. Maybe, she said. But truth ruins everything false it touches. For a long while, there was only the sound of the recorder ticking softly. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping the window like a metronome counting down to consequence. Finally, Whitmore exhaled. You'll never be satisfied. Even if you destroy me, they'll build another wall, another Whitmore to stand where I fell. Amara's voice softened. I know. He blinked. Then why fight? Because walls fall one brick at a time. She left the building alone. The night air hit her like release and punishment both. She walked through the rain, the folder pressed to her chest, the recorder still blinking faintly inside her pocket. At the hotel, Naomi was waiting. You went, she said, reading her face. Did he? He confessed. All of it. Naomi's eyes widened. You have it recorded? Amara nodded. He gave me what the world wouldn't proof. Naomi hugged her fiercely. Then this is it. It's over. Amara shook her head. It's never over. You expose one man, the institution buries 10 more. Naomi stepped back, frowning. Then what will you do with it? Amara looked down at the recorder in her hand, the red light still pulsing like a heartbeat. I don't know yet. Hours passed. She sat by the window, city lights flickering in the rain, Malik asleep in the other room. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. A woman who had conquered the impossible, and still carried the weight of being unseen. She thought of what Whitmore said, how truth bends to power. Maybe he was right. Maybe systems didn't break. They just adapted. She wondered if her victory would one day be rewritten into someone else's lesson. Her phone buzzed with messages. Journalists demanding statements. Academics offering collaborations. Strangers begging for her story. But she ignored them all. Tonight wasn't about triumph. It was about deciding what came next. Justice or peace. She replayed the recording once, listening to his voice tremble through the static. Every word was evidence. Every syllable a confession. She whispered to herself, "You can't bury me anymore." Then she closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her bones. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to fall asleep without fear. At dawn, she woke to the sound of her phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. She reached for it groggily, and every major news outlet notification flashed the same headline. Leaked audio, Harvard professor admits to stealing janitor's work. Amara sat upright, her heart hammered as she opened one of the links. It was the recording. The entire confession playing over footage of her standing outside Whitmore's office, the night before. Her voice, his voice, all of it laid bare to the world. Naomi burst into the room seconds later, holding her own phone. "It's everywhere," she said, breathless. CNN, BBC, every outlet. Someone leaked it. Amara's mind spun. "But I did it." Naomi stopped her. "Then who did?" Amara's phone buzzed again. An unknown number. One new message. It read only, "Now they'll believe you." But at what cost? She looked out the window, dawn breaking over the city, light spilling across the rain-slick streets. The truth was finally free, but so was something darker, something she hadn't yet named. As the recording played endlessly across the world, a breaking headline scrolled across the bottom of the TV screen. Dr. Charles Whitmore, found unresponsive in his hotel room. Authorities investigating. Amara's breath caught. The war for truth had just taken a turn she never wanted. The morning after the leak, the world erupted. Every screen in every airport, cafe, and newsroom played the same audio. Whitmore's confession. His voice cracked, his words desperate. "I erased her. I stole it." The world gasped, then divided. Some called it justice. Others called it revenge. By noon, Harvard released its statement. The university mourns the tragic passing of Dr. Charles Whitmore and urges respect for the ongoing investigation. Allegations circulating online regarding academic misconduct remain unverified. We caution against misinformation. It was smooth, polished, and cold. They didn't say her name, but the subtext screamed it. In the hours that followed, talking heads filled the airwaves. Some defended her. Most didn't. A well-known political commentator leaned toward the camera and said, "While this so-called confession appears genuine, one must consider the emotional instability of individuals who've faced professional rejection. Was this leak a cry for justice or obsession?" Another voice joined in. "A brilliant woman, yes, but clearly vindictive. A tragic figure consumed by resentment." They dissected her tone, her silence, her motherhood. Every frame of her became an indictment. In her apartment, Amara watched the coverage in silence. The glow from the TV reflected in her eyes like a fire she couldn't put out. Malik sat beside her, confused and angry. "Why are they lying about you?" he demanded. "You didn't do anything wrong." Amara muted the volume. "Because power doesn't vanish overnight, Malik. It reorganizes." He frowned. "Then what happens now?" She turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "Now we let the truth breathe." But the truth gasped for air. Within days, her inbox filled with hate. Anonymous emails spat venom. "You killed him. Liar. Affirmative action math doesn't count." Her phone buzzed endlessly. Journalists demanded statements. Others accused her of leaking the tape to drive Whitmore to his death. Naomi fielded as much as she could. "Don't open the comments," she warned. "It's poison." Amara nodded but didn't reply. She'd learned long ago that silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. Still, the weight pressed down. When she walked outside, cameras followed. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Some offered pitying smiles. Others whispered. One afternoon, as she left a cafe, a man muttered under his breath, "Hope it was worth it." She turned, meeting his eyes. Truth always is. He looked away first. At Harvard, the institution moved fast. Faculty meetings turned into containment sessions. Committees drafted new policies on academic integrity, all written to protect the university, not the truth. They scrubbed her name from the faculty directory. The cleaning staff whispered about her in the corridors, some proudly, some fearfully. The dean issued a memo, referring to an individual formerly employed within custodial services. Her identity became a rumor, a stain to be wiped clean. But outside those walls, something else was happening. Dr. Henrik Meyer went on record in Nature magazine. Amara Lewis's resonance model is the most significant theoretical contribution of the decade. Attempts to diminish her work are acts of cowardice, not nonsense. Other scientists followed. A physics lab in Zurich replicated her finding. A research team in Nairobi verified her constants. A young mathematician at Princeton posted an open letter titled, "She solved what we couldn't." Slowly, the academic tide began to shift. What Harvard tried to bury became uncontainable. Naomi visited her one evening, bringing groceries and updates. "You're trending again," she said, setting her phone on the table. #John Resonance Revolution. Students all over the world are rewriting your equations on campus walls. It's like a movement. Amara smiled faintly. "They'll paint over it." Naomi shook her head. "Not this time." MIT students organized a walkout, demanding Harvard acknowledge your authorship. Even Oxford is hosting a symposium on your model next month. Amara looked out the window at the dusk settling over Cambridge. "It's strange," she said quietly. "For years I couldn't get anyone to read my work. Now everyone's shouting my name." Naomi studied her. "You don't look happy." Amara turned to face her. "Because they're shouting it for the wrong reason. They think this is about one man's guilt, one woman's triumph. It's not. It's about how the world only believes truth when it's scandal." Naomi sighed. "Then what do you want to do?" "Keep working," Amara said simply. "The math doesn't care who screams loudest." But even work became difficult. Her access to university resources was gone. Journals hesitated to publish her follow-up research, citing ethical controversies. Grants dried up. Every institution that praised her privately feared her publicly. One rejection email ended with, "While we admire your contributions, we must prioritize partnerships that align with institutional values." She laughed when she read it. "They mean obedience," she told Naomi. "Then we'll build our own institution," Naomi said fiercely. "A digital one. Independent scholars. Open data. No gatekeepers." Amara looked at her, eyes tired but alive. "Then let's begin." They started small, uploading her datasets, publishing open-source proofs, inviting collaboration from across the globe. Within weeks, thousands of young scientists joined, eager to learn directly from her. It wasn't a university. It was a rebellion disguised as education. Soon, they called it the Resonance Network. Its motto, "Truth belongs to everyone." Meanwhile, Harvard doubled down. They launched a PR campaign, painting Whitmore as a tragic genius undone by false accusations. Op-eds appeared questioning Amara's ethics. A talk show host suggested she had weaponized race to destroy a man's career. Naomi read one of the articles aloud, disgusted. "Listen to this. Perhaps Dr. Lewis's brilliance is matched only by her bitterness." Amara shrugged. "They need me angry so they can feel calm." But she wasn't calm. At night she lay awake listening to Malik breathe, wondering if truth ever really triumphed, or just survived long enough to be misunderstood. She thought about Whitmore's last words. "You'll never be satisfied." He had meant it as a curse, but maybe it was a calling, because dissatisfaction, she realized, was what moved the world. Then one evening, as she was revising a new paper on the thermodynamics of symmetry, her inbox chimed. The subject line stopped her breath. From MIT Office of the Provost. Subject Research Chair Offer. She opened it slowly. "Dear Dr. Amara Lewis, on behalf of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it is our honor to offer you the inaugural position of the Lewis Chair in Mathematical Physics, established in recognition of your groundbreaking work on the resonance model. The position includes full research funding, a dedicated laboratory, and the freedom to lead interdisciplinary initiatives. We believe that true innovation requires not just intellect, but integrity. We hope you'll bring both to MIT. Sincerely, Dr. Elena Klein, Provost." Amara read it twice, her pulse uneven. Naomi, seeing her expression, asked, "What is it?" Amara handed her the laptop silently. Naomi's mouth fell open. "They're naming a chair after you? While you're still alive?" Amara nodded slowly. "And they want me to lead it." Naomi laughed, half in disbelief, half in joy. "Amara, this changes everything." Amara looked out the window again, the city lights shimmering like constellations reflected in water. "No," she said softly. "It just means I'll have to change everything else." She walked to the chalkboard, still leaning against her wall. Across the faded white lines, the word resonance still stood. She traced it with her finger. "For every door they close," she whispered, "we'll build a window." Naomi smiled. "So you'll do it?" Amara didn't answer immediately. She stared at the screen, at her name printed beside a title she never thought possible. Then she said quietly, "Maybe it's time to teach them what integrity really looks like." A new message appeared in her inbox, time-stamped only seconds after the MIT email. The sender, unknown at Harvard. The subject line read, "Before you accept, you should know the truth about Whitmore's death." The email glowed on Amara's screen like a phantom. "Before you accept, you should know the truth about Whitmore's death." For a long moment, she stared at it, the cursor blinking like a pulse. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't open it. Not yet. Outside her window, Cambridge was waking. Gray morning light, spilling across the brick streets. Students in hoodies rushing past with coffee cups and laptops. Life moved on, indifferent to ghosts. She closed the laptop slowly. "Not today," she whispered, because today, for the first time in her life, she was not defined by anyone else's shadow. MIT's campus stretched like an open horizon, glass, steel, and possibility. The morning of her first lecture dawned crisp and bright, the air sharp with early spring. Her new office overlooked the Charles River. The desk was cluttered with equations scribbled on scrap paper, coffee stains on printouts, and one small photograph, her and Malik on the steps of their old apartment, both smiling through exhaustion. Naomi knocked on the door, grinning. "You ready, Professor Lewis?" Amara smiled faintly. "That still sounds strange." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You earned strange. Let's go make history again." The lecture hall was already packed when they arrived. Every seat filled, students standing along the walls, news crews quietly recording from the back. The nameplate above the board read, "The Lewis Chair in Mathematical Physics, Inaugural Lecture." Malik sat in the front row, his notebook open, eyes wide with pride. He looked older now, taller, more confident, but still the same boy who once told her that numbers just wanted to belong. Amara stepped up to the lectern. The crowd quieted instantly. She looked out at the sea of faces, young, eager, diverse. Not one of them doubted her right to stand there. She began softly. "When I first saw an equation, I thought it was a language written by people who never meant for me to read it. Every symbol looked like a locked door. But over time, I learned something. They were never locked. They were just waiting for someone else to knock." A few students smiled. Others leaned forward, scribbling notes. Amara turned to the board and began to write, the chalk whispering against the surface. The room followed her rhythm, the slow build of logic into revelation. "What you see here," she said, "is the resonance model. Most of you know its theoretical form. Today we'll explore its application, how the same harmony that governs atomic balance can reshape the way we use energy." Equations filled the board in flowing lines. It's not rigid formulas, but living patterns. "Traditional systems lose energy as heat or resistance," she explained. "But if you allow the system to listen, to respond dynamically to its own fluctuations, it resonates, it stabilizes." Naomi nodded from the side of the room, beaming. "She's talking about adaptive renewables," she whispered to a colleague. Amara continued, her voice gathering strength. "Using resonance, we can design energy systems that self-correct, power grids that don't collapse under stress, engines that recycle loss, even biological systems that heal themselves." A murmur ran through the audience. One student raised a hand. "Professor, are you saying resonance could make renewable energy limitless?" Amara smiled. "Not limitless, balanced. Nothing in nature is infinite, but everything can harmonize." The student nodded, awed. As she wrote, the chalk snapped. The broken piece tumbled to the floor. She paused, staring at it, then said softly, "That's how the world treats what it doesn't understand. It breaks it. But the truth," she picked up the smaller piece, "keeps writing." Applause rippled quietly through the room. Halfway through the lecture, she changed slides. On the screen appeared photos, not of her but of others. A young black engineer from Detroit, a Haitian physicist whose work on thermal models was ignored, a Navajo mathematician who'd been denied funding 3 times. These, Amara said, are the minds you've never heard of. The ones who built bridges they were never allowed to cross. Every equation I've written stands on the backs of people who were told they didn't belong in the room. Her voice softened. So today, I dedicate this discovery to them, to every unseen mind, silenced by prejudice, to every janitor, assistant, caretaker, or dreamer who carried brilliance quietly, while the world looked past them. Naomi's eyes shimmered. Malik sat forward, his pencil unmoving, his eyes never leaving her. Amara turned back to the board and circled one variable. Resonance. This, she said, isn't just math. It's humanity. Because harmony isn't about sameness. It's about coexistence. The room erupted in applause. Some students stood. Others clapped through tears. For the first time, Amara felt what she had been chasing her whole life. Not validation, but belonging. After the lecture, she stood in the hallway as students crowded around her, asking questions, thanking her, handing her papers to sign. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. Naomi leaned against the wall, smiling. How does it feel to teach where no one doubts you? Amara exhaled slowly, like breathing after holding your breath for 20 years. One student approached timidly, a girl with braids and a worn notebook. Professor Lewis, she said, I don't know if you remember me. I wrote you once after your story went viral. Amara blinked. Detroit? The girl grinned. That's me. You told me to keep doing my homework. Amara's throat tightened. And here you are. I'm majoring in physics now, the girl said proudly. Because of you. Amara smiled, her eyes glistening. No, because of you. I just wrote the equation. The girl laughed, hugging her quickly before disappearing into the crowd. Naomi stepped forward. You've become what you needed when you were younger. Amara looked out the window where the sunlight glowed against the glass. Then maybe the equation really works. Later that afternoon, she sat at her new desk overlooking the river. The chalkboard from her old apartment had been moved here, still bearing the faint white traces of the original resonance formula. Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching something in his notebook. What are you working on? She asked. He smiled. A new idea. What if resonance works between people too? Like, if one person's courage makes others brave. Amara stared at him, pride swelling in her chest. Then the world might finally balance itself. He grinned. Maybe that's your next paper. She laughed softly. Maybe it's yours. As dusk fell, she prepared her closing remarks for the next day's seminar. Her mind drifted to Harvard, not the building, but what it symbolized. The walls that once excluded her now seemed so small, so far away. She opened the mysterious email again, the one she had ignored. Her finger hovered over the mouse. Before you accept, you should know the truth about Whitmore's death. Her phone buzzed just then, pulling her back. Naomi's name flashed on the screen. She answered. Turn on the news, Naomi said, her voice trembling. Now. Amara switched on the monitor mounted to the wall. The live feed showed a news anchor sitting stiffly behind the desk, the Harvard crest faintly glowing on the screen behind her. This just in, the anchor said. Harvard University has issued a formal public statement regarding the case of Dr. Amara Lewis and the late Dr. Charles Whitmore. Amara froze. Malik looked up from the floor. The anchor continued. In light of new evidence and after extensive internal review, Harvard acknowledges that Dr. Lewis's intellectual property was wrongfully misappropriated, and that systemic failures allowed discrimination to persist within our institution. On behalf of the university, we extend our deepest apologies to Dr. Lewis and to the many brilliant minds historically silenced by structural inequity. Effective immediately, Harvard will establish the Lewis Fellowship for Underrepresented Scholars in Theoretical Physics. Amara stared at the screen. The room felt too still, too unreal. Naomi's voice came through the phone, choked with disbelief. They actually said it. They said your name. Amara lowered the phone slowly. Malik climbed to his feet, his eyes wide. Mom, they finally said sorry. She didn't speak. The apology echoed through the room like the end of an era she'd spent her life surviving. But under the relief was something sharper. Uncertainty. Harvard didn't move without reason. And the timing, right after the anonymous email, was too perfect to ignore. As the broadcast faded, a breaking news banner appeared at the bottom of the screen. Developing story. Harvard apology follows newly discovered internal memo. Amara's heart quickened. Internal memo? She whispered. What memo? The screen cut to a close-up of a document with the Harvard seal. Lines of text blurred across the bottom. As the anchor read, according to leaked correspondence, Dr. Whitmore had been in contact with senior administrators days before his death. Sources suggest the memo contained warnings about suppressed data and institutional misconduct. Naomi's voice crackled through the phone. Amara, what if that's what your email meant? The truth about his death. Amara stared at the glowing screen, the apology still scrolling beneath it, like a confession disguised as redemption. As the feed cut to commercial, her laptop chimed. A new email appeared. No sender, no subject. Only one line. He didn't die. He was silenced. Harvard had never looked so small. The great stone buildings stood in their usual arrogance, cloaked in ivy and legacy. Yet to Amara, they felt like relics of a past she no longer belonged to, or perhaps had finally outgrown. The air was crisp, the sky a polished blue, and the faint toll of the afternoon bell echoed across the courtyard like a memory. She paused at the foot of the lecture hall steps, the same hall she used to mop, back when her name was stitched on a janitor's badge instead of printed in textbooks. For a moment she closed her eyes. The scent of chalk dust and old books seemed unchanged. Only she. Naomi stood beside her, clipboard in hand, excitement struggling to contain itself. You sure you're ready for this? Amara smiled faintly. I've been ready my whole life. Malik adjusted the collar of his shirt. He was taller now, his teenage awkwardness giving way to quiet confidence. They'll be watching you, Mom. Like everyone. She looked at him lovingly. Then let them watch what truth looks like when it refuses to die. Inside, the hall shimmered with anticipation. Professors, students, journalists, and alumni filled every seat. The same marble floor she once polished now reflected the camera lights of major networks. At the center of the stage stood a podium engraved with her name, Dr. Amara Lewis, the Resonance Chair Lecture Series. She stepped up to it slowly, the sound of her heels echoing across the hall. Conversations hushed, heads turned, cameras focused. Her name was whispered, not with condescension this time, but reverence. The dean, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and cautious pride, introduced her. Dr. Lewis represents not just scientific brilliance, but the courage to challenge the structures that once confined her. Today, she returns to where it all began, to remind us that discovery requires not only intellect, but integrity. Applause erupted. Amara took a breath and began. When I stood in this room years ago, she said, I wasn't standing here. I was down there. She pointed toward the aisle near the back, the place where her cleaning cart once stood. I cleaned your chalkboards. I emptied your trash. I listened to the lectures I wasn't allowed to take. A hush fell over the room. I used to wonder, she continued, what it would take for someone like me to be heard in a place like this. The answer, it turns out, was everything. Every ounce of patience. Every humiliation. Every time I was told I didn't belong. She paused, letting the silence settle. But here's the truth. The universe doesn't care where a discovery comes from. It doesn't recognize hierarchy. It only recognizes harmony. Behind her, a projection displayed her equation, the one the world now called the Lewis resonance model. The crowd leaned forward, as if witnessing something sacred. Amara stepped aside, picking up a piece of chalk. This, she said, writing the first line of her formula, was once just a whisper in my head, a pattern I saw when no one else was looking. She wrote slowly, each stroke deliberate, the chalk gliding across the board like music. When I first wrote this here, in this very hall, they called it nonsense, impossible. They laughed. Her voice softened, but the chalkboard never lied. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She turned, smiling. It only waits. She gestured toward the completed equation behind her, the same one that had changed science. This is proof that truth is patient, that genius doesn't wear a uniform or carry credentials. It can be found in a janitor's hand as easily as a scholar's. From the front row, Malik watched her with quiet awe. Naomi wiped a tear. Amara lowered the chalk, her voice trembling but steady. People often ask what I felt when they finally believed me. The answer? Relief, yes. But also grief. Because I realized how many others they never believed. She looked around the hall, her gaze sweeping over the students. The professors, the reporters. We lose brilliance every day, not because it doesn't exist, but because we refuse to see it, because we build walls around our imagination and call them standard. Her words hung in the air. She continued, quieter now. This isn't about revenge. I didn't come back to shame anyone. I came back to prove that light can exist in the same room that once tried to dim it. The audience rose slowly to their feet, applause breaking like a tide. But Amara wasn't finished. She turned back to the blackboard, erased a section and wrote one final line across the top in bold, deliberate strokes. Then she set the chalk down and stepped back. The applause stopped. For a moment, the entire hall was silent, stunned into stillness by the purity of the statement. The words gleamed against the blackboard, simple and undeniable. Amara looked at it for a long moment, her reflection faintly visible in the sheen of chalk dust. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a mirror for everyone who'd ever been unseen. Afterward, the crowd surged forward. Students eager for handshakes, professors offering congratulations, journalists clamoring for quotes. Amara smiled politely, answered a few questions, and slipped away before the frenzy could swallow her. Outside, the afternoon light washed the courtyard, in gold. She stood at the edge of the steps, looking out over the campus. It looked different now, not smaller, not larger, just human. Naomi joined her, carrying her bag. You realize you just made history again? Amara smiled softly. No, I just made peace. Naomi chuckled. Same thing, if you ask me. They started walking down the steps together. Students lingered nearby, taking photos of the board inside, the words already spreading online. Genius has no color trending before she even left the building. Amara turned to Malik, who was walking a few paces behind, looking up at the same hall she used to clean. He caught her gaze and smiled shyly. It feels different now, she nodded. It is different, because we are. They reached the courtyard fountain, where she had once sat years ago, exhausted from work and full of dreams she was too afraid to voice. The same spot where she had first decided she would never stop learning, no matter who told her she couldn't. Malik looked up at her, his voice quiet. Do you think they finally see us now? She paused. The question carried generations of weight. Every unseen scholar, every silenced dream, every locked door. Her eyes drifted back toward the building, where her words still glowed on the chalkboard. She exhaled softly, a small knowing smile tugging at her lips. Maybe, she said, but seeing isn't the same as understanding. Malik frowned. Then what comes next? She looked at him, at the young man who had helped her finish the impossible equation, who had turned connection into proof. Next, she said, we teach them how to listen. The wind rustled through the courtyard, carrying a faint dusting of chalk from an open window above. It floated through the air like snow, soft, weightless, infinite. And as Amara and Malik walked away, the words on the board remained, steady and immortal under the fading afternoon light. Genius has no color. As they reached the gate, Malik turned to her one last time. What if they finally see us now? Amara looked back at Harvard, the place that had once silenced her, now echoing with her truth. The faint ring of a distant classroom bell drifted through the air. She smiled. Then let's make sure they never forget what they saw. Some stories shouldn't have to be imagined. They're lived. Every single day. If you believe no one should be judged for the color of their skin, or the title on their badge, let their voices be heard. Type yes, if you believe in justice, and subscribe if this story broke your heart.